Hey friends, about 70% of folks watching my videos aren't subscribed. If you enjoy these stories, consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. Drop a like, leave a comment, and let me know where you're tuning in from. I wasn't much for people, never really had been. That probably sounds strange coming from a guy who's worked as a park ranger for nearly 12 years. But this solitude is what I craved. Out here among the pine trees and thick underbrush of northern Minnesota, I could breathe. My name's Clyde Warner, and back in 1998, I got into this line of work mostly to escape, not save. But as it turns out, life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. It was early August, a particularly busy time for the Superior National Forest. Tourists, hikers, and families lined the trails by day, and by night it was quiet again, just the way I liked it. On those days my job was simple. Keep the campers safe, check the cabins for supplies, make sure no one wandered off too far. Easy, right? Except nothing about that day was easy. I was stationed at a remote outpost, a little cabin about 10 miles from the nearest paved road. The cabin itself was nothing to brag about. A rickety porch, windows that whistled when the wind blew just right, and a radio that worked maybe half the time. It was rustic, but it got the job done. I'd been at the cabin for a few days already, just routine stuff. But around mid-afternoon, I got a call on the radio from dispatch. They told me 2 hikers were missing. Now, missing people weren't all that uncommon in a place like Superior National. The forest is dense, and it's easy for folks to lose their way. What made this particular call odd was the tone in the dispatcher's voice. You could tell she was shaken. They had gone off the trail somewhere near Hiawatha Lake, a place I knew well. It's known for its jagged cliffs and thick groves of pine. They didn't give me much more than that, just the coordinates, and I was on my way. By the time I got to Hiawatha, the sun was starting to sink lower, throwing long shadows over the forest floor. I parked my truck near the lake's edge and started toward the trail. The usual chatter of wildlife, the chirps, the rustling of leaves, seemed quieter, muted almost. I chalked it up to my own nerves. But part of me thought the hikers would be easy to find. Maybe they twisted an ankle or gotten dehydrated. I'd find them, bring them back to safety, and that would be the end of it. But that wasn't the end of it. After about an hour of hiking, I found something strange near the trailhead gear, a backpack, water bottles, some food wrappers, all scattered as if someone had just dropped it in a hurry. That's when the first weird feeling crept over me, like I was being watched. I turned around more times than I cared to admit, and each time there was nothing there. I wasn't armed. That's a stupid thing to admit, but Superior had a policy about rangers carrying weapons. Budget cuts or some nonsense like that. But here I was, in the middle of nowhere with nothing but a flashlight and a whistle. A whistle? Like that was gonna help me. I kept walking, calling out their names. I didn't even know what they looked like, just 2 hikers. That's all I had. But every time I shouted, there was no response. Just the wind moving through the trees. Eventually I reached a clearing. The lake was visible through the trees. Still as glass, and I figured I was close. But just as I started toward it, I heard something. A snap, like a branch breaking somewhere behind me. I froze. I don't know why, but something told me not to move. That's when I saw it. At first I thought it was a bear. It had the bulk, the size, but as it stepped forward into the clearing, I realized this thing was no bear. Its shoulders were hunched too low to the ground, and its arms longer than they should have been. The fur, or what looked like fur, was patchy, almost mangy, and its head, Jesus. Its head was narrow, like a wolf's, but worse, much worse. The creature crouched, its long limbs folding beneath it. And that's when I noticed something dark hanging from its mouth. Something that didn't belong to it. My gut clenched. I didn't need to get closer to know what it was. I stepped back slowly, my heart pounding in my ears. The thing didn't notice me at first, but then it sniffed the air, its head twitching. It knew I was there. I should have run. Any sane person would have run, but I couldn't move. Not with the thing staring at me like that. And then, in a jerky, unnatural motion, it began to move toward me. Its body swayed from side to side, its arms almost dragging in the dirt. In a panic, I threw the only thing I had, my flashlight. It didn't do much, just bounced off its hide like a toy, but it was enough to make it stop. It seemed confused, like it didn't know what to do next. Then it turned and bounded into the trees, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. And didn't stop to think. I ran, bolting through the forest, not caring if I was making noise or not. By the time I made it back to the lake, I was gasping for air and my legs shaking. I stumbled back to my truck and radioed for backup, trying to explain what I'd seen, but the words wouldn't come out right. All I could say was, "There's something out here." I knew how it sounded, like I'd lost my mind, but I didn't care. 2 hours later, another ranger arrived. Jake Larson, the guy I'd worked with a few times before. He was no-nonsense, ex-military, the kind of guy you wanted around when things went sideways. I taught him everything, and to my surprise, he didn't laugh. He didn't even question it. He just nodded, loaded his rifle, and said, "We should go check it out." So we did. We modded back to the clearing near the lake, and sure enough, the gear I'd found was still there. But something else was too. Blood. It was splattered across the dirt, dark and sticky, leading deeper into the trees. Jake knelt down, studying it, then glanced up at me. We followed the trail for what felt like miles, the trees getting denser, the air colder. My hands were shaking again, but this time I wasn't alone. At least if that thing came back, Jake had the rifle. They only saw it, or what was left of them. The hikers, or at least I think it was them. What we found was more like pieces, chunks of flesh, torn clothing, scattered bones. Jake swore under his breath and motioned for me to step back. There was no way this was a bear attack. I've seen bear attacks. This was different. As we stood there trying to make sense of the mess, I heard it again. The same snap of branches, the same shuffle of leaves. Jake raised his rifle, aiming into the darkness. But before he could pull the trigger, it hit him. Something huge, heavy knocked him off his feet, sending him crashing to the ground. I saw it again, just for a second. The creature, its jaws snapping inches from Jake's throat. He screamed, firing wildly, but the thing didn't stop. It tore into him, biting and slashing. I couldn't watch, but I couldn't look away either. I didn't have a weapon, nothing to fight it off with, so I did the only thing I could. I ran. By the time I made it back to the truck, I was in shock, my mind spinning. I could still hear Jake's screams echoing through the trees. The police came later, along with a whole team of rangers. They found what was left of Jake and the hikers, but no sign of the creature. They questioned me for hours, trying to make sense of it all. But how do you explain something like that? I told them what I saw, what happened, and for the most part, they believed me. At least they didn't call me crazy. But there was nothing they could do, no explanation they could offer. They hailed it as an animal attack, closed off the area, and that was that. I never went back to Hartha Lake after that. I stayed on the job for a few more years, but I kept to the safer parts of the park, the places where I knew I wouldn't run into anything unusual. Sometimes, though, I think about Jake, about the way he looked at me before it all went down, and I wonder if maybe I should have done more. If maybe I could have saved him somehow. But then again, when you're staring at a creature like that, something that doesn't belong in this world, well, it's easy to feel helpless. The weeks following the incident were a blur of police interviews, psych evaluations, and sleepless nights. I couldn't shake the image of that thing from my mind, its unnatural movements, the way it seemed to defy everything I thought I knew about the natural world. The official investigation was a joke. It brought in some wildlife experts who spouted theories about unusually aggressive bears or mountain lions. But I knew what I saw wasn't any kind of normal animal. I started having nightmares. Every night I'd find myself back in those woods, running from something I couldn't see. Something that was always just a step behind me. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, convinced that the creature was right outside my window, waiting to finish what it had started. The Park Service offered me time off, suggested I see a therapist, but I know that wouldn't help. How could I explain to someone who hadn't been there, who hadn't seen what I'd seen? So I threw myself back into work, taking on extra shifts, anything to keep my mind occupied. But every time I stepped into the forest, every time I heard a twig snap or a leaf rustle, I'd freeze, my body tensing for an attack that never came. I started researching, looking for any similar incidents in the area. It wasn't easy. A lot of the older records were incomplete or had been lost over the years. But slowly a pattern began to emerge. Every few decades there would be a spike in missing persons cases in the park. The official reports always chalked it up to hikers getting lost or animal attacks. But the details were eerily similar to what I'd experienced. Strange noises in the woods, unidentifiable tracks, and in a few cases, remains that had been torn apart in ways that defied explanation. The most recent cluster of disappearances had been in the late night. A group of campers had gone missing, and the only thing found was a campsite that had been destroyed in a way that the investigators said looked more like a tornado had hit it than any animal attack. As I dug deeper, I started to notice other oddities. The area around Hiratha Lake had a history of strange occurrences dating back to the earliest settlers. Native American legends spoke of a creature that lived in the deepest parts of the forest, a beast that was neither man nor animal, but something in between. I became obsessed with finding an explanation. I spent my free time poring over old newspaper articles, interviewing longtime residents of the area, even reaching out to cryptozoologists and folklorists. Most of them dismissed me as another crackpot, but a few showed interest. One researcher, a professor of folklore at a nearby university, told me about similar legends from other parts of the country. He called it a Wendigo, a creature of insatiable hunger that was said to possess humans and turn them into monsters. The more I learned, the more convinced I became that what I'd encountered wasn't just some unknown animal. It was something older, something that had been haunting these woods long before humans ever set foot here. To know what it might be didn't make me feel any better. If anything, it made the fear worse. Because now I knew that this thing, whatever it was, wasn't just some mindless beast. It was intelligent, patient, and had been successfully hiding from humanity for centuries. As the months passed, I found myself growing more and more paranoid. I'd catch movement out of the corner of my eye, only to turn and find nothing there. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I'd heard that same snapping of branches outside my window. I started carrying a gun, even though it was against park regulations, despite not caring. I wasn't going to be caught unprepared again. But the worst part wasn't the fear or paranoia. It was the guilt. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jake's face in those final moments, the look of terror, the silent plea for help. I kept replaying the scene in my mind, wondering what I could have done differently. Should I have tried to fight? Should I have stayed with him instead of running? The rational part of my brain knew there was nothing I could have done. If I had stayed, I would just have ended up as another victim. But that didn't stop the guilt from eating away at me. I started drinking more than I should have. It was the only way I could fall asleep without the nightmares. My work began to suffer. You'd show up late for shifts or not at all. My superiors were understanding at first, chalking it up to PTSD from the animal attack, but as time went on, their patience began to wear thin. I knew I was on thin ice, but I couldn't bring myself to care. Then, about 6 months after the incident, something happened that shook me out of my spiral. Hiker went missing near Hiawatha Lake. The area had been reopened to the public, deemed safe after months without any unusual activity. But as soon as I heard the report, I knew it was back. I volunteered to join the search party, ignoring concerned looks from my fellow rangers. They thought I was pushing myself too hard and wasn't ready to go back out there. But I knew I had to go. I was the only one who knew what we were really dealing with. We set out at dawn, a team of 5 rangers and a couple of local volunteers. The mood was tense but optimistic. Most thought we'd find the hiker alive, maybe injured or lost, but I knew better. As we hiked deeper into the forest, I could feel the weight of dread settling in my stomach. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every sound a potential danger. We searched all day, conning through dense underbrush and scaling rocky outcroppings. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the trees, we found the first sign of the missing hiker. A torn backpack, its contents scattered across a small clearing. It was just like before. I felt my heart rate spike, my palms growing sweaty as I gripped my rifle tighter. The other rangers wanted to keep searching, pushing on into the darkness, but I knew that would be suicide. Whatever was out there, it had the advantage at night. I managed to convince them to make camp, waiting for daylight before continuing the search. As we sat around the campfire that night, I could see doubt and fear creeping into their eyes. They were starting to realize this wasn't a normal search and rescue mission. I took first watch, my eyes scanning the darkness beyond the circle of firelight. The forest was unnaturally quiet, with no crickets chirping or owls hooting. Just an oppressive silence that seemed to press in on us from all sides. And then, just as I was about to wait the next person for their shift, I heard it. A familiar snapping of branches and heavy breathing that had haunted my nightmares for months. I raised my rifle, my hands shaking as I tried to peer into the darkness. For a moment there was nothing. Then I saw them, eyes glowing in the firelight, watching us from just beyond the trees. But not just one pair, dozens surrounded our camp on all sides. I shouted, waking the others. They scrambled for their weapons, forming a tight circle as the creatures emerged from the shadows. They were just as I remembered, twisted, unnatural things that moved with a jerky, unsettling grace. But there were so many of them. How had they hidden for so long? How had we never noticed? What followed was chaos. Gunshots echoed through the night, mixing with screams of terror and pain. I fired until my rifle clicked empty, then grabbed a burning branch from the fire, swinging it wildly at any creature that got too close. But it wasn't enough. They overwhelmed us, their massive bodies crashing through our defenses like they were nothing. I saw my fellow rangers fall, one by one, torn apart by razor-sharp claws and gnashing teeth. I fought with everything I had, but I knew it was hopeless. There were too many of them, and we were too unprepared. As I felt claws raking across my back, tearing through my jacket and into flesh, I thought, this is it. This is how I die. But then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The creatures retreated, melting back into the shadows of the forest. I stood there, panting, bleeding, surrounded by the broken bodies of my team. I was the only one left alive. As the adrenaline faded and the pain set in, I realized the truth of what had happened. This wasn't just a random attack, it was a message. The creatures wanted me to know that they were still here, still watching, and they wanted me to spread the word. I stumbled back to civilization, my body battered and my mind reeling from what I just experienced. The journey back was a blur of pain and fear, every shadow in the forest a potential threat. When I finally reached the ranger station, I collapsed, barely able to string together a coherent sentence. The aftermath was a nightmare of questions, disbelief, and thinly veiled accusation. How had I survived when everyone else had died? Why couldn't I provide a clear description of the attackers? The official report labeled it as a bear attack, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. They didn't believe me, but they couldn't explain what had happened either. I was put on administrative leave, pending a full investigation and psychological evaluation. But I knew I couldn't just sit back and do nothing. The creatures were out there, growing bolder, and I was the only one who knew the truth. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into research with a fervor that bordered on obsession. I poured over every scrap of information I could find about the history of the area, the legends, the unexplained disappearances. I reached out to experts in cryptozoology, folklore, and even parapsychology, desperate for any explanation that might make sense of what I'd seen. Most dismissed me outright, but a few showed interest. One researcher, Dr. Evelyn Marsh, a folklorist specializing in Native American legends, agreed to meet with me. When I told her my story, her face went pale. "Mr. Warner," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "what you're describing matches ancient legends of creatures known as skinwalkers. They're shapeshifters, beings of tremendous power and malevolence, but they're not supposed to be real." I laughed bitterly. "Tell it to the things that killed my team." Dr. Marsh leaned forward, her eyes intense. "If what you're saying is true, then we're dealing with something far more dangerous than anyone realizes. These aren't just animals, Mr. Warner. They are intelligent, they're patient, and they've been hiding among us for centuries." Her words sent a chill down my spine. I'd suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed by an expert made it all too real. "So what do we do?" I asked. She shook her head. "I don't know, but I do know this. You can face them alone. Whatever these things are, they're too powerful for one person to handle." I left Dr. Marsh's office with a mix of relief and dread. Relief that someone finally believed me, that I wasn't crazy, but dread at the implications of what she had told me. These creatures, these skinwalkers, weren't just some unknown animals, they were something far worse. As I drove back to my apartment, my mind raced with possibilities. How many of these things were out there? How long had they been hiding in the forests, picking off unsuspecting hikers and campers? And most importantly, how could they be stopped? I knew I couldn't go to the authorities. They'd already dismissed my story once, and I had no proof beyond my own testimony. No, if I was going to do something about this, I'd have to do it on my own. That night, as I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by notes and printouts, I made a decision. I was going back into those woods not as a ranger, not as part of some official investigation, but as a hunter. I was going to find these creatures, document their existence, and find a way to stop them. It was a suicide mission and I knew it, but I also knew I didn't have a choice. Those things were out there hunting, killing, and nobody else was going to do anything about it. It had to be me. I spent the next month preparing. I bought camping gear, high-powered rifles, and every type of trap I could think of. I studied survival techniques, brushed up on my tracking skills, and even delved into some of the more esoteric protective measures Dr. Marsh had suggested. Silver bullets, sacred herbs, protective symbols. Finally, on a cold October morning, I loaded up my truck and headed back to Superior National Forest. As I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was driving to my own death, but I also felt a grim sort of determination. If I was going to die, I was going to take as many of those bastards with me as I could. The forest looked different now. What had once been a place of solace and beauty now felt oppressive, threatening. Every rustling leaf, every snapping twig set my nerves on edge. I knew they were out there, watching, waiting. I set up camp in a small clearing, about far from where I'd had my first encounter with the creatures. It was a risk, camping so close to their hunting grounds, but I needed to draw them out. I needed them to come to me. The first few days were uneventful. I patrolled the area, set up trail cameras, and laid traps. At night, I sat by my campfire, rifle across my lap, straining my ears for any sound out of place. But there was nothing, just the normal sounds of the forest at night. On the fourth night, everything changed. I was dozing by the fire when I heard it. That familiar heavy breathing. My eyes snapped open, my hand tightening on my rifle. There at the edge of the clearing stood one of the creatures. It was just as I remembered. Massive, misshapen, with those unnaturally long limbs and that wolfish head. But now, seeing it clearly for the first time, I noticed other details. Its eyes glowed with an eerie intelligence, and its mouth was filled with row upon row of razor-sharp teeth. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Then slowly, deliberately, it took a step forward. I raised my rifle, my heart pounding in my chest. "Stay back," I warned, my voice shaking. To my shock, it spoke. The sound was guttural, more like a growl than actual words. But I could understand it. "You should not have come back, human," it said. I nearly dropped my rifle in surprise. You can talk?" The creature's mouth stretched into what might have been a grin, revealing even more of those terrible teeth. "We can do many things," it said. "Things your kind has long forgotten." I tightened my grip on the rifle, trying to keep my voice steady. Why are you killing people?" The creature tilted its head, regarding me with those glowing eyes. "We are the old ones," it said. "We were here long before your kind, and we would be here long after. As for why we kill," it paused, and I swear I saw amusement in its eyes. "We kill because it is our nature. Just as it is your nature to breathe, to eat, to sleep." I felt a chill run down my spine at its words. This wasn't just some animal acting on instinct. This was a thinking, reasoning being, and that made it infinitely more dangerous. "I can't let you keep killing," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. The creature's grin widened. "And how do you plan to stop us, little human, with your toys?" It gestured at my rifle. "We have faced far worse than you and survived. We are eternal." With that, it lunged forward, moving faster than anything its size had any right to move. I fired, the sound of the gunshot echoing through the clearing. The creature stumbled, dark blood oozing from a wound in its shoulder. But it didn't stop. I scrambled backward, firing again and again. Some shots missed, but others found their mark. The creature howled in pain and rage, a sound that seemed to shake the very trees around us. But still, it kept coming. As it reached me, I swung the rifle like a club, catching it across the face. It reeled back, giving me a moment to pull the silver knife from my belt. I lunged forward, driving the blade deep into its chest. The effect was immediate and horrifying. The creature let out a scream that was more human than animal, the sound of pure agony. Its body began to twist and contort, the fur melting away to reveal pale human-like skin underneath. I stumbled back, watching in horror as the creature transformed before my eyes. In moments where the monster had stood, there was now a man. He was old, his body emaciated and scarred, but undeniably human. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and what looked like relief. "Thank you," he whispered before collapsing to the ground, dead. I stood there panting, my mind struggling to process what I'd just seen. A creature, the skinwalker, whatever it was, it had been human, or at least it had once been human, as the adrenaline faded. I became aware of movement in the forest around me, more of them coming to investigate the commotion. I knew I couldn't face them all. Not here, not now. I grabbed my pack and ran, leaving behind the body of the man who had once been a monster. As I crashed through the underbrush, I could hear them behind me, their howls mixing with two human voices. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like they were on fire. When I finally stopped, collapsing against a tree, I realized I was hopelessly lost. The forest stretched out in every direction, dark and forbidding. As I sat there trying to catch my breath and get my bearings, I heard a voice. Not the guttural growl of the creatures, but a human voice calling out in the darkness. Hello? Is someone there? Please, I need help. I hesitated. It could be a trap, the creatures using a human voice to lure me in. But what if it wasn't? What if there was someone else out here, someone who needed my help? Taking a deep breath, I stood up and headed towards the voice. As I pushed through a thick patch of undergrowth, I found myself in another small clearing, and there, in the center, was a sight that made my blood run cold. A woman was there, tied to a tree. She was battered and bruised, her clothes torn. When she saw me, her eyes widened with hope and fear. Please, she begged. Please help me. They're coming back. They're gonna kill me. I rushed forward, pulling out my knife to cut her free. As I worked on the ropes, I asked, Who did this to you? The creatures? She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. No, not creatures, people. They looked like normal people, but then they changed. Just as I cut through the last of the ropes, I heard a twig snap behind me. I whirled around, raising my rifle, but I was too late. The last thing I saw was a group of people emerging from the trees. Then something hit me hard on the back of the head and everything went black. I woke up to pain and darkness. My head throbbed where I'd been hit, and my arms ached from being stretched above my head. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I realized I was in some kind of cave, my wrists bound to a rocky outcropping above me. Ah, the hunter awakens, a voice said from the darkness. I squinted, trying to make out the speaker. A figure stepped forward, and I felt my heart skip a beat. It was the woman from the clearing, the one I tried to rescue. But there was something different about her now. Her posture was different, predatory, and her eyes glowed with the same eerie light I'd seen in the creatures. You, I gasped. You're one of them. She smiled, and in the dim light, I could see that her teeth were sharper than they should be. Very good, she purred. You're smarter than most humans we lure in. More figures emerged from the shadows, forming a loose circle around me. Some looked human. Others were in various stages of transformation, their bodies twisted into horrific half-human, half-beast forms. One of them, a tall man with silver hair, stepped forward. When he spoke, I recognized the guttural voice of the creature I'd killed in the forest. You've caused us quite a bit of trouble, Mr. Warner, he said. It's not often that one of your kind manages to kill one of us. I struggled against my bonds, but they held fast. What are you? I demanded. What do you want? The silver-haired man chuckled, a sound that sent chills down my spine. We've had many names over the centuries, skinwalkers, wendigos, shapeshifters, but names are unimportant. What matters is what we are. He began to pace in front of me, his movements fluid and predatory. We are the apex predators, Mr. Warner, the top of the food chain. We've existed alongside humanity for millennia, calling your numbers, keeping you in check. You're monsters, I spat, killing innocent people for sport. The woman who had lured me into the trap laughed. Sport? Oh no, Mr. Warner, we kill to survive, to evolve. The silver-haired man nodded. You see, we weren't always like this. Once we were human, just like you, but we found a way to transcend our weak mortal forms and become something greater. He leaned in close, his breath hot on my face. When we kill, when we feed, we don't just take a life, we absorb the essence of our prey. The memories, their skills, their very being becomes a part of us. With each kill, we grow stronger, smarter, more powerful. I felt sick to my stomach as the implications of his words sank in. So all those missing hikers, all those animal attacks were food and fuel for our evolution. The woman said simply. The silver-haired man stepped back, gesturing to the others around him. We are the future of humanity, Mr. Warner, the next step in evolution, and nothing you or anyone else does can stop us. I sagged against my bonds, the weight of hopelessness settling over me. They were right. How could anyone fight against something like this? How could humanity defend itself against predators that looked just like them until it was too late? A thought occurred to me, a desperate, probably suicidal thought. But at this point, I had nothing left to lose. If you're so powerful, I said, forcing bravado into my voice. Why hide? Why skulk in the shadows? If you're really the future, why not just take over? The silver-haired man's eyes narrowed. We are patient, he said. We have time on our side. Why rush when we can pick you off slowly, growing stronger with each passing year? I laughed, the sound harsh and bitter in the confines of the cave. Sounds like you're afraid to me. Afraid that if humanity knew about you, they'd wipe you out. All your power, all your evolution, and you're still terrified of a bunch of weak humans? A low growl rumbled through the assembled creatures. I saw anger flash in the silver-haired man's eyes, and for a moment I thought he might kill me then and there. But then he smiled, a cold, cruel expression that chilled me to my core. You think you're clever, don't you? He said, trying to goad us into action. But we've dealt with your kind before. Those who learn too much, who try to expose us. Would you like to know what happened to them? He snapped his fingers, and two of the creatures dragged forward another prisoner. My heart sank as I recognized him. It was Jake, my fellow ranger who I thought had been killed months ago. But this wasn't the Jake I remembered. His body was emaciated, his skin pale and waxy. His eyes, once full of life and humor, were now dull and unfocused. He looked at me, but there was no recognition in his gaze. This is what happens to those who oppose us, the silver-haired man said. We don't just kill them, we break them. We feed on their minds, their memories, their very souls until there's nothing left but an empty shell. He placed a hand on Jake's shoulder, and to my horror, Jake leaned into the touch like a pet, seeking its master's approval. Your friend here has been quite useful. His knowledge of the Forest Ranger protocols has helped us stay hidden, and now, Mr. Warner, you'll join him. The creatures began to close in around me, their forms shifting and twisting as they prepared to feed. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the end. But just as I felt the first touch of claws on my skin, a deafening explosion rocked the cave. My eyes snapped open to see the cave entrance collapse, sending rocks and dust flying everywhere. Through the chaos, I heard gunshots and shouts, human voices calling out orders and warnings. The creatures howled in rage and confusion, some of them rushing towards the blocked entrance while others fled deeper into the cave. In the commotion, I felt my bones loosen. Someone was cutting me free. I turned to see Dr. Marsh, the folklorist I'd spoken to months ago. She pressed a gun into my hands. We need to move now. She shouted over the chaos. I stumbled to my feet, my head spinning from the sudden turn of events. How did you find me? I asked as we made our way through the collapsing cave. I've been tracking you since you left my office, she explained, firing at a creature that lunged at us from the shadows. I knew you'd do something stupid like this, so I called in some favors. We've got a whole team out there, military, scientists, even some government agents who've been investigating these creatures for years. We fought our way through the cave, the creatures' howls mixed with gunfire and shouted orders. I saw Jake, still in his catatonic state, being led away by a group of soldiers in hazmat suits. The silver-haired leader was nowhere to be seen. As we emerged from the cave into the pre-dawn light, I was astounded by the scale of the operation. Helicopters circled overhead, their searchlights cutting through the darkness. Armored vehicles surrounded the area. Dozens of armed personnel were engaged in firefights with the creatures throughout the forest. Dr. Marsh led me to a command center set up in a clearing. Inside, I was introduced to the leader of the operation, a stern-faced woman who introduced herself only as director. "Mr. Warner," she said, her voice clipped and businesslike. "I understand we have you to thank for finally exposing these creatures. We've been tracking their activities for decades, but this is the first time we've been able to launch a full-scale assault on their stronghold." I slumped into a chair, the adrenaline fading and leaving me exhausted. "What are they?" I asked. The director exchanged a glance with Dr. Marsh before answering. "We're not entirely sure. Our best guess is that they're the result of an ancient Native American ritual gone wrong, a way to gain power by taking on animal aspects that somehow mutated over time. But that's just a theory. What matters," Dr. Marsh interjected, "is that we can stop them. The silver seems to disrupt their ability to shapeshift, and concentrated electrical shocks can revert them to human form permanently. I thought about Jake, about the empty shell he'd become. Can you help the people they fed on?" The director's expression softened slightly. "We're gonna try. We have a team of the best neurologists and psychologists working on it, but I won't lie to you. The prognosis isn't good for most of them." As we spoke, reports continued to come in from the teams in the field. The creatures were being captured or killed, their hidden layers exposed and destroyed. It seemed like we were winning, but then an alarm blared through the command center. One of the technicians monitoring the communications equipment called out. "Director, we're picking up similar reports from all over the country. Creature sightings, attacks. It's like they're everywhere." The director's face paled. "They must have signaled for reinforcement somehow. This isn't just a local infestation. It's a nationwide uprising." I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized the true scale of what we were facing. This wasn't just about saving a few hikers in a national park anymore. This was about the survival of humanity itself. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. I found myself at the center of a massive covert operation to combat the creature threat across the country. My knowledge of their behavior, combined with Dr. Marsh's expertise in folklore and the government's resources, made me an invaluable asset. We set up a base of operations in an abandoned military facility, coordinating strikes against creature strongholds and developing new weapons and tactics to use against them. I spent my days in strategy meetings and my nights poring over reports of sightings and attacks, trying to predict where they might strike next. The creatures, realizing their existence was now exposed, had abandoned all pretense of hiding. Reports flooded in from across the nation, entire towns going dark, highway patrol officers encountering twisted beasts on lonely roads, campers and hikers disappearing en masse. But while we're making progress, our teams, armed with silver weapons and specialized equipment, were successful in their raids more often than not. We rescued hundreds of prisoners from the creature's lairs, though many were like Jake, their minds and spirits broken beyond repair. As we pushed the creatures back, we learned more about their origins and capability. Dr. Marsh's theory about a ritual gone wrong seemed to be close to the truth. We discovered ancient texts that spoke of a way to gain the strength of animals to take on their aspects and abilities. But the ritual required a sacrifice, not just of life, but of humanity itself. The first skinwalkers had been powerful shamans and warriors who had performed the ritual believing they could control its effects. However, the power had corrupted them, twisted them into the creatures we now faced. Over centuries, they had spread their curse, creating more of their kind through a perverted version of the original ritual. The biggest breakthrough came when we captured one of their leaders alive during a raid on a stronghold in the Rocky Mountains. I was part of the strike team, my experience with the creatures making me an asset in the field despite the risks. We fought our way through dozens of beasts, their howls echoing off the mountain peaks as we pushed deeper into their lair. And there, in a chamber adorned with grisly trophies, we found him, the silver-haired leader from the cave in Minnesota. That I was fierce. The creature was far stronger and faster than a human, its claws and teeth lethal weapons. But we had numbers and technology on our side. After a grueling fight that left half our team injured or dead, we managed to subdue him with concentrated electrical shocks and silver restraints. Back at the base, the creature was subjected to intense interrogation. At first, he resisted, snarling threats and snapping at anyone who came close. But as the days wore on, deprived of the ability to shapeshift and cut off from his kind, he began to weaken. Finally, after nearly a week, he broke. The information he provided was invaluable. He revealed the locations of major creature nests across the country, their methods of communication, even the intricacies of the ritual that created them. Most importantly, he told us of their ultimate plan. The creatures weren't just hunting for food or sport, they were preparing for a massive, coordinated attack that would wipe out or subjugate humanity in one fell swoop. They had infiltrated key positions in government and military around the world, waiting for the signal to strike. Armed with this knowledge, we launched a desperate, global counteroffensive. I found myself traveling from one hotspot to another, advising military leaders and local law enforcement on how to combat the threat. We had some close calls in Seattle. We barely managed to prevent a creature from detonating a dirty bomb that would have irradiated half the city. In Miami, we uncovered a plot to poison the water supply with a compound that would have made people more susceptible to the creature's influence. But slowly, painstakingly, we began to turn the tide. As news of the creature's existence spread, people became more vigilant. Communities organized themselves into watch groups, armed with the knowledge of how to spot and defend against skinwalkers. It wasn't without cost. Thousands died in the fighting, and the world would never be the same. The realization that such creatures had been living among us, hidden for centuries, shook the foundations of society. Paranoia and mistrust became rampant, with people suspecting their neighbors, co-workers, even family members of being creatures in disguise. After months of fighting, we had pushed the creatures back to their last stronghold, a remote, mountainous region in Alaska. Intelligence suggested that this was where the oldest and most powerful of their kind had retreated, preparing for a last stand. Our force was formidable, a coalition of military units from around the world, along with specially trained monster hunting teams. We had aircraft equipped with thermal imaging to spot the creatures, even when they shapeshifted, and weapons designed specifically to combat their unique abilities. As we made our final preparations, I found myself standing at the edge of our base camp looking out at the snow-covered peaks that hid our enemy. Dr. Marsh joined me, her face grim. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, as I laughed humorlessly. "Ready to face an army of ancient shape-shifting monsters that want to eat my soul?" "Sure, why not?" She put a hand on my shoulder. "You've come a long way from that park ranger who stumbled into my office ranting about monsters in the woods. Whatever happens tomorrow, know that you've saved countless lives. You've given humanity a fighting chance." I nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle over me. Tomorrow, one way or another, this would end. The battle began at dawn. We advanced into the mountains, our forces spread out to cover as much ground as possible. For hours, there was tense silence, broken only by the crunch of snow under our boots and the whisper of wind through the trees. Then all hell broke loose. It came at us from all sides, a writhing mass of fur and claws and teeth. The creatures moved like liquid shadows, their forms shifting and changing as they attacked. The air was filled with gunfire, explosions, and otherworldly howls of skinwalkers. I found myself in the thick of the fighting. My silver-loaded rifle cracked again and again as I took down creature after creature. But for every one that fell, two more seemed to take its place. We were pushed back, our lines breaking under the relentless assault. As I fought, I caught glimpses of the larger battle raging around us. Helicopters dueled with winged monstrosities in the sky, while tanks fired salvos at massive bear-like creatures that shrugged off conventional weapons. In the chaos, I got separated from my unit. I found myself alone in a narrow ravine, the sounds of battle echoing distantly. That's when I saw him, the true leader of the skinwalkers. He was enormous, easily twice the size of the other creatures we'd faced. His form seemed to constantly shift, as if unable to settle on a single shape. One moment he looked almost human, the next he was a monstrous amalgamation of wolf and bear and things I couldn't even name. When he spoke, his voice was like grinding boulders. "So you're the one who started all this trouble. The little human who thought he could hunt the hunters?" I raised my rifle, trying to keep my hands from shaking. "It's over," I said. "Your kind is finished." The creature laughed, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Finished? You've existed for millennia, hiding in plain sight. You really think you can wipe us out so easily?" He began to move towards me, his form rippling and changing with each step. "I'll give you credit, human. You've caused us more trouble than any of your kind in centuries. But in the end, you're still just prey." I fired, the silver bullet striking the creature squarely in the chest. But he didn't even flinch. He just kept coming, his massive claws reaching for me. I scrambled backward, firing again and again, but nothing seemed to slow him down. As my back hit the ravine wall, I realized with a sinking feeling that this might be the end. But then, just as the creature was about to strike, blinding light filled the ravine. The skinwalker howled in agony, its form seeming to melt and reform rapidly. I looked up to see a helicopter hovering overhead. A massive spotlight mounted on its underside bathed the area in light. Dr. Marshu's voice came over a loudspeaker UV light applied. It disrupts their ability to shapeshift. Seizing the opportunity, I loaded my last silver bullet and took careful aim. The creature, disoriented and unable to maintain its powerful form, was vulnerable for the first time. I fired. The bullet struck true right between its ever-shifting eyes. The skinwalker let out a final, earth-shaking roar before collapsing to the ground, its body dissolving into a puddle of formless matter. With the death of their leader, the remaining creatures seemed to lose their will to fight. Some fled into the wilderness while others surrendered, reverting to human form and begging for mercy. As the sun set on the battlefield, I stood among my fellow soldiers, battered and exhausted but victorious. We had done it. We had faced the nightmares that lurked in the shadows and emerged triumphant. In the months and years that followed, the world struggled to come to terms with the reality of the skinwalkers. The revelation of their existence shook the foundations of society, forcing us to reevaluate everything we thought we knew about history, mythology, and the nature of humanity itself. There were those who called for the extermination of all captured skinwalkers, seeing them as an irredeemable threat. Others advocated for finding a way to cure them, to reverse the effects of the ancient ritual that had created them. In the end, a middle ground was reached. Those skinwalkers who surrendered and agreed to forsake their predatory ways were placed in specially designed sanctuaries. They were under close supervision. They were studied by scientists, hoping to unlock the secrets of their incredible abilities for the benefit of mankind. As for me, I found I couldn't return to my old life. The experiences I'd been through, the things I'd seen and done, had changed me too profoundly. I joined a new organization, one dedicated to monitoring supernatural threats and protecting humanity from the dangers lurking in the shadows. Our work is never done. Though I defeated the skinwalkers, we soon discovered that they were just one of many hidden threats in the world. Vampires, werewolves, ghosts, all the creatures of legend that we'd dismissed as myth turned out to have some basis in reality. But now at least we're prepared. Humanity has looked into the darkness and emerged stronger, more united. So we know now that we're not alone in this world, that there are things beyond our understanding lurking in the wild places. And when I find myself in the forest at night listening to the wind whisper through the trees, I no longer feel the old fear. Instead, I feel a sense of purpose, of readiness, because I know that whatever's out there, whatever comes creeping out of the shadows, will be ready for it. The monsters may still be out there, but they're not hunting us anymore. We're hunting them. Ancona Caccina and the events I am about to recount took place in the summer of 20. It has haunted me ever since, shaping my life in ways I never could have imagined. I grew up on the Navajo Reservation in Arizona, surrounded by vast deserts and towering mesas. Life was simple but challenging. We didn't have much, but we had each other and the land. After high school, I left the reservation to work as a mechanic in Phoenix. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me a sense of independence. One sweltering Friday afternoon in July, as I was finishing up a transmission repair, my phone buzzed. It was my childhood friend Alice Big Eye. We hadn't spoken in years, but his name on the screen brought back a flood of memories. "Cody, how have you been, man?" Ella's voice was as warm and familiar as ever. We caught up briefly, and then Alice got to the point of his call. "Listen, I'm planning a camping trip in the Superstition Mountains next weekend, like old times, you know." "You in?" I hesitated. The Superstition Mountains held a special place in our shared history. We'd spent countless weekends exploring the rugged terrain as teenagers, seeking adventure and escape from the everyday pressures of reservation life. But it had been years since I'd gone camping, and the thought of leaving the comfort of my air-conditioned apartment was less than appealing. So it'd be good for you. Get away from the city, reconnect with nature. Remember how we used to talk about the spirits of the mountains? All right, you've convinced me. When do we leave? We made plans to meet the following Friday afternoon. As I hung up, a mix of excitement and apprehension settled in my stomach. Little did I know this trip would change everything. The week dragged on, each day at the garage blending into the next. By the time Friday rolled around, I was more than ready for a change of scenery. I packed my old camping gear, including the weathered 30-30 rifle that had belonged to my grandfather. I wasn't much for hunting, but the rifle was a connection to my past, a reminder of the hours Grandpa spent teaching me to shoot. As I drove out of Phoenix, the urban sprawl gradually gave way to the rugged beauty of the Arizona desert. The Superstition Mountains loomed on the horizon, their jagged peaks silhouetted against the cloudless sky. A sense of nostalgia washed over me, tinged with an inexplicable unease. I met Alice at the trailhead, and for a moment it was like no time had passed at all. He grinned as he got out of his truck, his long hair tied back in a ponytail. "Curdy, man," he said, "it's good to see you." We embraced, and I felt some of my tension melt away. Alice had always had that effect on people. Easygoing, quick to laugh, and full of life. As we shouldered our packs and set off down the trail, I found myself grateful that I'd agreed to come. The first few miles were filled with catching up. Ellis told me about his job as a wildlife biologist studying the impact of climate change on desert ecosystems. I shared stories from the garage, the characters I met, and the challenges of keeping old cars running in Arizona's punishing heat. As we hiked deeper into the wilderness, the conversation gradually died down, replaced by the rhythmic crunch of our boots on the rocky trail and the occasional call of a hawk circling overhead. The familiar landscape brought back memories of our younger days, but something felt different. The shadows seemed deeper, the silence more oppressive. By late afternoon, we reached a small clearing near a creek, our usual camping spot from years ago. We set up our tents and gathered wood for a fire. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, we sat around the crackling flames, roasting marshmallows and reminiscing about old times. "Remember that time we thought we saw a skinwalker?" Ellis chuckled, poking at the fire with a stick. I shuddered involuntarily. How could I forget? We didn't sleep for 2 days after that. Ellis' expression grew serious. "You know, there's a place I want to show you tomorrow. I found it a few months back when I was doing some field research. Well, you'll see." Something in his tone made me uneasy, but I brushed it off. Sounds intriguing, looking forward to it. As we tuned in for the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The familiar sounds of the desert night, the hoot of an owl, the distant yip of coyotes seemed somehow distorted as if filtered through a veil of dread. I tossed and turned, my sleep plagued by fragmented dreams of dark, twisting shapes and echoing whispers. Little did I know this was only the beginning of a nightmare that would consume our lives and test the very limits of our sanity. The next morning dawned clear and bright. The early sun cast long shadows across our campsite. I emerged from my tent, groggy and unrested, to find Ellis already up and brewing coffee over the rekindled fire. Morning sunshine, he grinned, handing me a steaming mug. Sleep well? I grunted noncommittally, taking a long sip of the strong, bitter brew. Not really. Weird dreams. Ellis nodded, his expression unreadable. Yeah, the mountain can do that to you, especially if you're not used to the quiet anymore. We had a quick breakfast of granola bars and dried fruit, then broke camp. Ellis seemed eager to get moving, his earlier relaxed demeanor replaced by an almost feverish excitement. So where's this mysterious place you want to show me? I asked as we shouldered our packs. Ellis grinned, a glint in his eye that I couldn't quite interpret. It's about a 3-hour hike from here. Trust me, it's worth it. The trail Ellis led us on wasn't one I recognized from our younger days. It wound deeper into the mountains, becoming steeper and more treacherous as we climbed. The vegetation grew sparser, giving way to bare rock and scree slopes. The sun beat down mercilessly, and despite the early hour, sweat soaked through my shirt. As we hiked, Ellis filled the silence with talk about his research on changing migration patterns, shifting plant communities, and the delicate balance of the desert ecosystem. But there was an undercurrent to his words that I couldn't quite place. The desert is full of secrets, he said at one point, pausing to take a swig from his water bottle. Things that have been hidden for centuries, maybe millennia. And now, with the climate changing, some of those secrets are coming to light. I raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Ellis shook his head. You'll see, we're almost there. Another hour of grueling hiking brought us to a dense thicket of mesquite and ironwood trees, incongruously lush in a barren landscape. Ellis pushed through the branches, revealing a narrow opening in the rock face behind them. Watch your head, he warned, ducking into the cave entrance. I hesitated for a moment, an inexplicable sense of dread washing over me. The opening seemed to swallow the light, a yawning void in the sun-baked rock. Taking a deep breath, I followed Ellis into the darkness. The temperature dropped immediately. The cool, damp air was a sharp contrast to the desert heat. The sound of our breathing echoed off the closed walls, amplified in the stillness. Ellis flicked on his headlamp, and the beam cut through the gloom. This way, he murmured, leading me deeper into the earth. The passage widened into a large chamber, the ceiling lost in shadows above us. As Ellis swept his light across the walls, I gasped. The rock was covered in intricate petroglyphs, hundreds of them, depicting scenes of hunts, dances, and what looked like complex rituals. Ellis, this is incredible, I breathed, reaching out to touch the ancient artwork. Wait till you see this, Ellis said, his voice tight with excitement. He led me to a smaller side chamber, and what I saw there made my blood run cold. The walls were covered in more carvings, but these were different. The figures were twisted, distorted, almost monstrous. They seemed to writhe in the flickering light of our headlamps, their empty eyes following our movements. What is this place? I whispered, unable to tear my eyes away from the disturbing images. Ella's voice was hushed and reverent. I don't know exactly, but I think it's some kind of record. Warning, maybe. A warning about what? Instead of answering, Ellis crouched down, brushing away some debris from the floor of the chamber. Look at this, he said, holding up a small object. There was a stone no bigger than a golf ball, intricately carved with symbols similar to those on the walls. In the beam of the headlamp, it seemed to pulse with an inner light. "I found this last time I was here," Ellis said, turning the stone over in his hands. I've been trying to decipher the markings, but he trailed off, his brow furrowing. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cave's cool air. "Maybe we should go," I suggested, suddenly eager to be back in the sunlight. Ellis nodded absently, pocketing the stone. Yeah, let's head back." As we made our way out of the cave, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The shadows seemed to move at the edges of our vision, and more than once I thought I heard whispers echoing from the deeper recesses of the cave. We emerged into the late afternoon sun, blinking like miners coming off shift. The desert heat enveloped us once again, but it did little to dispel the chill that had settled in my bones. On the hike back to our campsite, Ellis was uncharacteristically quiet, lost in thought. I found myself jumping at small noises, the skitter of a lizard across the rocks, the rustle of wind through the scrub brush. The mountains, once a place of adventure and solace, now felt oppressive, hiding untold secrets in their stony embrace. As we set up camp for the night, I couldn't help but feel that something had changed. We had crossed a threshold, stumbled upon something that was never meant to be found. And as the sun set, painting the sky in bloody hues, I wondered if we would ever be the same again. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay in my tent, listening to the sounds of the desert night. Every rustle and snap amplified by my heightened senses. Ellis had been quiet during dinner, picking at his food and staring off into the distance. When I asked him about the cave and the stone, he'd been evasive, changing the subject. As the hours crawled by, I found myself replaying the day's events in my mind. The twisted figures on the cave walls seemed to dance behind my closed eyelids, their distorted forms merging and separating in a nightmarish ballet. Sometime after midnight, I heard movement outside my tent. Thinking it was Ella's getting up to use the bathroom, I didn't pay it much mind at first. But then I heard something else. A sound that didn't belong in the desert night. There was a low, guttural noise, almost like speech, but no language I'd ever heard. My heart racing, I grabbed my flashlight and, after a moment's hesitation, my grandfather's rifle. Unzipping the tent as quietly as I could, I peered out into the moonlit clearing. At first I saw nothing out of the ordinary. The embers of our campfire glowed faintly, and Ella's tent stood silent a few yards away. Then, movement caught my eye at the edge of the clearing. A shadow, darker than the surrounding night, seemed to shift and flow like smoke. I blinked hard, convinced my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. When I looked again, the shadow was gone. But the feeling of being watched remained, prickling the hair on the back of my neck. "Ellis," I called softly, not wanting to wake him if he was asleep, but netting the reassurance of another human voice. There was no response from his tent. Fighting down a rising panic, I fumbled with the flashlight, switching it on and sweeping the beam across the campsite. The light fell on Ellis' tent, and I saw that the flap was open. Heart pounding, I approached, calling his name again. But the tent was empty. Ellis' sleeping bag was in disarray, as if he'd left in a hurry. A twig snapped in the underbrush beyond the clearing, and I whirled toward the sound, raising the rifle instinctively. "Ellis," I called again, louder this time. "This isn't funny, man." Only the quiet sounds of the desert night answered me. Fighting down the urge to run, I took a deep breath and stepped to the edge of the clearing, peering into the darkness beyond. The moonlight cast strange shadows among the rocks and scrub brush, and every shape seemed to conceal potential threats. I was about to turn back to the campsite when I saw it. A flash of movement just at the edge of my vision. I spun, bringing the rifle up, but there was nothing there, just rocks and shadows. Then I heard it again. That strange, guttural, not quite language, closer this time. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, filling the night air with its alien cadence. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. Ellis, if that's you, this isn't funny. Silence fell heavy and oppressive. Even the night insects seemed to have gone quiet. I stood there frozen for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes. Slowly, reluctantly, I lowered the rifle and turned back to the campsite. And there, at the edge of the firelight, stood Ellis. And Ollie dropped the gun in shock. Jesus, Ellis, where the hell have you been? You scared the shit out of me. But as I approached, I realized something was wrong. Ellis stood unnaturally still, his eyes fixed on something in the distance. When I got closer, I saw that his pupils were dilated, his gaze unfocused. Ellis, I said, reaching out to shake his shoulder. Hey man, snap out of it. At my touch, Ellis blinked rapidly, seeming to come back to himself. He looked at me in confusion, then around at the campsite as if seeing it for the first time. Cody, what? What's going on? Why are you holding the rifle? I stared at him incredulously. Are you kidding me? You disappeared in the middle of the night. I heard noises, I thought. Billy shook his head, running a hand through his disheveled hair. I don't remember getting up. I was having this dream about the cave, and then he looked down at himself, seeming to notice for the first time that he was standing outside his tent. How did I get out here? I lowered the rifle, the adrenaline that had been coursing through my veins starting to ebb, leaving me shaky and exhausted. I don't know, man, but something weird is going on. I heard noises, saw something moving out there in the dark. Ellis' eyes widened, a look of excitement mixed with fear crossing his face. He saw something. What did it look like? I shook my head, suddenly reluctant to describe the shapeless shadow I'd glimpsed. I'm not sure. It was probably nothing, just shadows and an overactive imagination, you know. But Ellis wasn't listening. He was patting his pockets frantically, a look of panic growing on his face. The stone, he muttered. Where's the stone? I watched bewildered as he dove into his tent, rummaging through his backpack. After a moment, he emerged, holding the carved stone we'd found in the cave. The relief on his face was palpable. Ellis, I said carefully, what's going on? What's so important about that stone? He looked at me, and for a moment I saw something in his eyes that I didn't recognize, a mixture of fear and something else, something almost like hunger. Then he blinked and it was gone, replaced by a weak smile. It's nothing, he said, pocketing the stone. Just a souvenir, you know? Didn't want to lose it. I nodded, not believing him for a second, but too tired to press the issue. Right. Well, maybe we should try to get some sleep. We've got a long hike back tomorrow. Ellis nodded, already turning back to his tent. Yeah, you're right. Good night, Cody. As I crawled back into my sleeping bag, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. The desert night, once familiar and almost comforting, now seemed filled with hidden threats. And Ellis. Ellis was hiding something, I was sure of it. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and filled with dreams of dark caves and whispering shadows. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, unusual for the Arizona summer. A heavy stillness hung in the air, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. I emerged from my tent to find Ellis already up, packing his gear with quick-efficient movements. Morning, I said, yawning. You're up early. Ellis grunted in response, not looking up from his task. I frowned, taken aback by his brusqueness. It was so unlike him. Everything okay? I asked, starting to break down my own tent. He paused, finally meeting my eyes. Yeah, just didn't sleep well. Weird dream. I nodded, remembering the events of the night before. Yeah, me too. Listen, about last night, we should get moving. Ellis interrupted, shouldering his pack. Storm's coming. We don't want to get caught out here if it hits. I looked up at the sky, noting the dark clouds gathering on the horizon. Ellis was right. I needed to get back to the trailhead before the weather turned, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was avoiding talking about what had happened. We set off at a brisk pace, the usual trail banter conspicuously absent. Ellis led the way, moving with a single-minded determination that I found unsettling. Every so often his hand would stray to his pocket, as if checking that the stone was still there. As we hiked, the wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of rain and ozone. The storm was moving faster than I'd expected, dark clouds roiling overhead. We pushed on, our boots kicking up dust from the dry trail. About 2 hours into our hike, we reached a fork in the trail. Ellis paused, looking between the two paths with a frown. "Something wrong?" I asked, coming up beside him. He shook his head, but I could see the confusion in his eyes. I'm not sure which way we came. They both looked familiar, but I felt a twinge of unease. Ellis had always had an uncanny sense of direction, especially in these mountains. For him to be uncertain was deeply out of character. "Let's take a break," I suggested. "Have some water, check the map." "Well, figure it out." Ellis nodded absently, already reaching for his water bottle. As he drank, I pulled out the topographical map we'd brought along. But as I studied it, my unease grew. The landmarks didn't seem to match up with where I thought we were. Had we somehow gotten turned around? A low rumble of thunder rolled across the sky, and I felt the first few drops of rain on my skin. He needed to make a decision, and fast. "I think we should take the left fork," Ellis said, suddenly pointing to the trail that led deeper into the mountains. I frowned. "Are you sure?" I thought the trailhead was more to the east. Ellis' eyes flashed with irritation. "I know these mountains, Cody. Trust me." Something in his tone made me hesitate. This wasn't the Ellis I knew, the easygoing friend who was always open to discussion, but with the storm bearing down on us, we didn't have time to argue. "All right," I said reluctantly. "Lead the way." As we set off down the left-hand trail, the rain began to fall in earnest. Within minutes, we were soaked to the skin, the path beneath our feet turning to slick mud. The wind howled through the rocks, carrying with it a sound that made my skin crawl, a low, rhythmic chanting just on the edge of hearing. I glanced at Ellis, wondering if he heard it too, but his face was set in grim determination as he forged ahead. The trail grew steeper, winding its way up the side of a rocky outcropping. My legs burned with effort and my lungs strained in the thin mountain air. Suddenly, Ellis stopped short, nearly causing me to crash into him. "Do you see that?" he asked, pointing ahead. Through the curtain of rain, I could just make out a dark opening in the rock face, a cave entrance partially hidden by scrub brush. Is that the cave from yesterday?" I asked, a chill running down my spine that had nothing to do with the rain. Ellis nodded, a strange light in his eyes. "It must be, but how did we—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "We should take shelter, wait out the storm." Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn back, to get as far away from that cave as possible. But as another flash of lightning illuminated the sky, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder, I knew we had no choice. We couldn't risk being exposed on the mountainside in this weather. Reluctantly, I followed Ellis into the cave entrance. The sudden absence of the howling wind and pounding rain was almost shocking. We stood there for a moment, water dripping from our clothes, listening to the storm rage outside. "We shouldn't go too deep," I said, switching on my flashlight. "Just enough to stay dry until the storm passes." But Ellis wasn't listening. He was already moving deeper into the cave, his own light bobbing in the darkness ahead. With a muttered curse, I followed him. The passageway twisted and turned, leading us deeper into the mountain. The air grew cooler, heavy with the scent of damp stone and something else, a musty organic smell that made my nose wrinkle. "Ellis!" I called out, my voice echoing strangely off the stone walls. "We should head back, we're going too deep." He didn't respond, didn't even slow down. His pace was almost frantic now, as if he was being pulled along by some unseen force, and then suddenly the passage opened up into a large chamber. My flashlight beam couldn't reach the ceiling, lost in the darkness above, but what it did illuminate made my blood run cold. The walls were covered in carvings, hundreds of them, more intricate and disturbing than those we'd seen in the other cave. They depicted scenes of violence and madness, figures twisted into impossible shapes, their faces frozen in eternal screams. In the center of the chamber stood Ellis, the carved stone held out before him like an offering. His eyes were wide, unfocused, his lips moved in a silent chant. "Ellis," I said, my voice shaking. "Ellis, we need to leave now." He turned to look at me, and in that moment I knew that whatever was looking out through my friend's eyes wasn't Ellis anymore. "Don't you see, Cody?" he said, his voice unnaturally deep and resonant. "This is what we were meant to find. This is what we were called here for." As he spoke, the carvings on the walls seemed to move, writhing and pulsing in the flickering light of our flashlights. And from the depths of the cave came a sound, that same guttural alien language I'd heard in the night. Only this time it was getting closer. Time seemed to stand still in that cavernous chamber. The only sounds were the steady drip of water from unseen crevices and the echo of that alien chanting growing ever louder. Ellie stood transfixed, the carved stone pulsed with an otherworldly light in his outstretched hand. As I tried again, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Whatever you think this is, it's not real. We need to leave now." His head snapped towards me, his eyes were wild and unfocused. "Not real," he laughed. The sound was harsh and brittle in the confines of the cave. "This is more real than anything we've ever known, Cody. Can't you feel it?" As if in response to his words, a tremor ran through the ground beneath our feet. Dust and small rocks rained down from the unseen ceiling, and the carvings on the walls seemed to writhe with renewed vigor. I took a step back, my hand tightening on the strap of my rifle. "Alice, listen to me. You're not yourself. That stone, this place, it's doing something to you. We need to go before." My words were cut off by a deafening roar that shook the very foundations of the mountain. From the depths of the cave, something was approaching, something big. Ellis' face split into a manic grin. "They're coming," he whispered, reverence and terror mingling in his voice. "The old ones. They're finally coming back." The chanting grew louder, and with it came a wind that shouldn't exist this deep underground. It whipped around us, carrying with it the stench of decay and something else, something ancient and utterly alien. In that moment, survival instinct overrode everything else. I lunged forward, grabbing Ellis by the arm. "We're leaving." No. But Ellis was stronger than I remembered, or perhaps whatever was possessing him lent him unnatural strength. He shook me off with ease, his free hand shooting out to grab my throat. "You don't understand," he snarled, his face inches from mine. "We can't leave. We're part of this now. We're the key to their return." I struggled against his grip, spots dancing in my vision as I fought for air. In desperation, I brought the rifle up between us, using it as a lever to push him away. Ellis stumbled back, momentarily caught off guard. I gasped for breath, bringing the rifle up to bear. "Ellis, please." I wheezed. "Don't make me do this." For a moment, I saw a flicker of my old friend in his eyes, confusion, fear, a silent plea for help. But then it was gone, replaced by that alien hunger. He lunged at me again, the stone in his hand flaring with baleful light. I squeezed the trigger without conscious thought. The report of the rifle was deafening in the enclosed space. Ellis jerked back, a look of surprise on his face. He looked down at his chest, where a dark stain was spreading across his shirt. "Cody," he said, his voice suddenly small and confused. "What? What's happening?" And then he crumpled to the ground, the carved stone rolling from his limp fingers. For a moment I stood there in shock, the rifle hanging loosely in my hands. What had I done? But there was no time to process. The chanting had reached a fever pitch and the ground was shaking continuously now. Moving on autopilot, I scooped up the stone, shoving it into my pocket. Then I grabbed Ellis under the arms and began to drag him toward the passage we'd entered through. It was slow going. Ellis was a dead weight, and the increasingly violent tremors made it hard to keep my footing. Rocks were falling more frequently now, and I could hear ominous cracking sounds from deep within the mountain. We had almost reached the passageway when I heard it, a sound so vast and alien that my mind recoiled from it. It was like the roar of 1,000 storm-tossed oceans, the screech of metal tearing, and the death cry of some impossibly large beast all rolled into one. I looked back, and in the flickering beam of my dropped flashlight, I saw something emerging from the depths of the cave. It was massive, filling the chamber with its bulk. In the poor light, I could make out writhing tentacles, too many eyes, a maw that could swallow a house. Terror gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. Hoisting Ellis over my shoulder in a fireman's carry, I staggered into the passageway. Behind us, the thing in the chamber roared its frustrated rage. The journey back through the twisting passage was a nightmare of darkness, falling rocks, and the constant fear that at any moment some tentacle would wrap around my ankle and drag us back. Ellis' blood soaked into my shirt, and his labored breathing was a counterpoint to my own panicked gasps. After what seemed like an eternity, I saw light ahead, the gray daylight of the storm-racked afternoon. With a final surge of desperate energy, I half ran, half fell out of the cave entrance. The storm had passed, but the air was heavy with ozone and an unnatural stillness. I didn't stop to rest. I didn't even look back. With Ellis still over my shoulder, I stumbled down the mountainside, heedless of the treacherous footing. It wasn't until we were a good mile from the cave that I finally allowed myself to stop. Gently, I lowered Ellis to the ground. His face was pale, his breathing shallow. "Ellis," I said, tapping his cheek. "Ellis, can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open, focusing on me with difficulty. "Cody," he mumbled. "What? Maori? What happened?" I shook my head, fighting back tears of relief and lingering terror. "It's okay, buddy, we're safe now. We're gonna get you help." As if in mockery of my words, a deep rumble echoed across the mountains. I looked back to see a plume of dust rising from where I thought the cave had been. The entire side of the mountain seemed to be collapsing in on itself. Ellis followed my gaze, his eyes widening in recognition and fear. "The cave," he whispered. "Cody, the things I saw, what I almost did. It's over now," I said, trying to convince myself as much as him. "Whatever was in there, it's buried. It couldn't hurt us anymore." But even as I said it, I felt the weight of the carved stone in my pocket, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my core that this was far from over. The next few days passed in a blur of hospital rooms, police interviews, and sleepless nights. I had managed to get Ellis down the mountain and to the nearest ranger station, where they immediately called for a medical evacuation. The official story was that there had been a hiking accident, a fall, a stray bullet from the rifle discharging. It was easier than trying to explain the truth. Ellis survived, but just barely. The bullet had missed his heart by inches, collapsing his lung and causing massive internal bleeding. As he recovered in the ICU, I spent hours by his bedside waiting for him to wake up, treading the conversations we would have to have. When he finally regained consciousness 3 days after our ordeal, his first words to me were, "I'm sorry." I shook my head, fighting back tears. "You have nothing to be sorry for, Ellis. Whatever happened in that cave, it wasn't you." He turned away, his eyes haunted. "It was me, Cody. Part of me, at least. I wanted it. The power, the knowledge. I would have given anything for it. I didn't know how to respond to that. The truth was, I was scared. Scared of what had happened, scared of what it meant, and most of all, scared that some part of Ellis still yearned for whatever had been awakened in that cave. The police questioned us separately, of course. I stuck to the accident story, claiming that Ellis had slipped and I had accidentally discharged the rifle while trying to catch him. It was flimsy, but without any evidence to the contrary, they seemed to accept it. Phil, for his part, claimed to remember very little of what had happened. Whether this was true or just a convenient way to avoid difficult questions, I couldn't be sure. As soon as Ellis was stable enough to be moved, he was transferred to a hospital in Phoenix. I visited him daily, watching as he slowly regained his strength. We talked about mundane things, the weather, sports, anything but what had happened in the mountains. But I could see the change in him, the easy smile, the infectious laugh. They were gone, replaced by a wary guardedness. Sometimes I would catch him staring off into space, his lips moving in silent words I couldn't understand. And always there was the stone. I had hidden it in my apartment, wrapped in layers of cloth and shoved to the back of my closet. But I could feel its presence like a low-grade fever I couldn't shake. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I thought I could hear it whispering. A week after Ellis was released from the hospital, he showed up at my apartment unannounced. He looked better, the pallor gone from his cheeks, some of the old spark back in his eyes. But there was an urgency to his movements that set me on edge. "We need to talk," he said, as soon as I opened the door, about what happened, about what's coming. I let him in, a sense of dread settling in my stomach. "What do you mean, what's coming?" Ellis paced my small living room, running his hands through his hair. "The cave, the carvings, the thing we saw, it's not over, Cody. We opened something that was meant to stay buried." I sank onto the couch, suddenly feeling very tired. "Ellis, whatever happened in that cave, it's over now." The cave collapsed, remember? Whatever was in there is buried. Ellis shook his head vehemently. "You don't understand. The cave was just a gateway while we awaken. It's not bound by our laws of physics or our understanding of reality. It's coming, Cody, and we're the key to its arrival." I stared at him, a chill running down my spine. What are we talking about? What key? His eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment I saw that alien hunger flicker in their depths. "The stone. You have it, don't you?" I hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, I have it. But, Ellis, that thing is dangerous. We should destroy it or bury it somewhere. No one will ever find it." No. The vehemence in his voice made me flinch. He took a deep breath, visibly calming himself. "No, we can't destroy it. It's too important. It's our only link to understanding what's coming, our only hope of being prepared." I stood up, backing away from him. "Ellis, listen to yourself. Listen to you talking. That thing in the cave, whatever it did to you, you're not thinking clearly." His face hardened. "I'm thinking more clearly than I ever have. Cody, I've seen things, understood things that most humans can't even comprehend. We have a chance to be part of something greater than ourselves, something that will reshape the very fabric of reality." As he spoke, I felt a vibration from the closet where I'd hidden the stone, the low pulsing hum that seemed to resonate with Ellis' words. "Give me the stone, Cody," Ellis said, his voice taking on that unnaturally deep tone I remembered from the cave. "It's calling to me. It knows I'm the one who can unlock its secrets." I backed away further, my hand groping for the door handle. "No, I can't do that, Ellis," I said. "I'm sorry, but I can't let you have it. Whatever's happening to you, well, find a way to fix it. But not with that stone." His face contorted with rage. "You don't understand. You can't stop this, Cody. The It's already begun. The old ones are stirring, and they will not be denied their return. He lunged at me faster than I would have thought possible. I barely managed to dodge, yanking open the door and stumbling out into the hallway. "Run if you want," Ellis called after me, his voice echoing strangely in the narrow space. "But you can hide from what's coming. None of us can." I ran, my heart pounding, not stopping until I was several blocks away. As I leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath, I realized with a sinking feeling that I couldn't go back to my apartment. Ellis was there, and he wouldn't leave until he got what he wanted. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and dialed it. I didn't know if the police would believe me. Didn't know if I even believed myself. But I knew one thing for certain. Whatever had begun in that cave in the Superstition Mountains, it was far from over, and somehow I was right in the middle of it all. The next few weeks were a blur of paranoia and sleepless nights. After my encounter with Ellis, I had gone to the police, telling them a sanitized version of events, that my friend was experiencing some kind of psychotic break, that he had threatened me. They took a report, promised to keep an eye out for him, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. Without any concrete evidence of a crime, there wasn't much they could do. I couldn't go back to my apartment, not with Ellis potentially waiting for me there. I ended up staying with a coworker from the garage, sleeping on his couch and jumping at every unexpected sound. I called in sick to work, unable to focus on anything but the growing sense of dread that consumed my every waking moment. The stone remained hidden in my apartment, and its absence was like a physical ache. Part of me wanted to go back to retrieve it, to study it, and unlock its secrets. But I knew that was exactly what Ellis wanted, what the thing in the cave wanted. I had to resist. As the days passed, strange reports began to filter through the news. Unexplained phenomena across the Southwest. Lights in the sky, mysterious sounds emanating from the earth, people going missing only to return days later with no memory of where they'd been. Most dismissed these as hoaxes or mass hysteria, but I knew better. The old ones, as Ellis had called them, were stirring. I tried to research to find some explanation for what was happening. I scoured the internet for information on the Superstition Mountains, ancient cults, and forgotten gods. What I found chilled me to the bone. References to entities older than time itself, sleeping beneath the earth, waiting for the stars to align. Cultures across the world had stories of these beings, these old ones, and the apocalypse that would herald their return. And always there were references to a key. A stone carved with eldritch symbols, a gateway between worlds. About 2 weeks after my confrontation with Ellis, I received a text from an unknown number. "Meet me at Papago Park. Sunset, come alone, we need to talk." Every instinct screamed at me to ignore it, to run as far and fast as I could. But I knew I couldn't keep running forever. Whatever was happening, I was a part of it now. I had to face it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I made my way to the designated meeting spot. The park was mostly empty, the few remaining visitors packing up to leave for the day. I saw him before he saw me, a solitary figure standing atop a small hill, silhouetted against the dying light. Ellis. He looked different, somehow both more and less than the man I had known. His posture was straighter, his movements more fluid. But there was an otherness to him that sent shivers down my spine. "Goody," he said as I approached, not turning to look at me. "I'm glad you came. What do you want, Ellis?" I asked, keeping my distance. "Why did you call me here?" He toned then, and I had to stifle a gasp. His eyes, once warm brown, now swirled with an impossible shifting array of colors. "To show you," he said, his voice resonating with that unnatural depth. "To make you understand." With a gesture, he indicated the city sprawling below us. Look at them, Cody, scurrying about their little lives, oblivious to the grand tapestry of the cosmos. They can see what's coming. They can comprehend the change that's about to sweep over this world. And you can, I challenged, fighting to keep my voice steady. Ella smiled, and it was not a human expression. I'd been given a gift. Cody. Understanding beyond mortal comprehension. The old ones have chosen me as their herald, their voice in this world. I shook my head, backing away. This is it, Ellis. Whatever's happened to you, whatever's controlling you, we can fight it. We can find a way to undo this. His laughter was like shattering glass. Undo? Why would I want to undo this? I've been elevated, Cody. I see the world as it truly is, the hidden currents that shape reality. And soon, very soon, everyone will see it too. As he spoke, I became aware of movement in the gathering darkness. Shapes, half glimpsed out of the corner of my eye, flitting between the trees and rocks. And voices, whispers in that same alien language I'd heard in the cave. What have you done? I whispered, horror dawning as I realized we weren't alone. Ellis spread his arms wide, his alien eyes gleaming with triumph. I've called them Cody the Faithful, the Chosen, those who hear the whispers of the Old Ones and answer. They're gathering, preparing for the Great Awakening. As if in response to his words, figures began to emerge from the shadows. Men and women of all ages and backgrounds, but all with the same unsettling otherness that Ellis exuded. Their eyes, too, swirled with impossible colors. Join us, Cody, Ellis said, extending a hand. Embrace the truth. Be a part of the new world that's coming. For a moment, I felt it a pull, a yearning to step forward and take his hand, to surrender to whatever vast alien intelligence was behind all of this. The promise of knowledge, power, or being part of something greater than myself was almost overwhelming. But then, I thought of the twisted carvings in the cave, of the monstrous thing that emerged from the depths, of the terror and wrongness that had permeated every moment since we'd stumbled upon that accursed place. No, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. Whatever this is, whatever you've become, I aren't no part of it. Ellis' face hardened. The alien light in his eyes flared. You don't have a choice, Cody. None of us do. The stars are aligning, the gates are opening, the old ones will return, and this world will be remade in their image. As he spoke, the gathered crowd began to chant. Their voices blended into a cacophony of alien syllables that set my teeth on edge. The very air seemed to vibrate with otherworldly energy. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my ears. Behind me, Al's voice rose above the chanting. You can run from this, Cody. It's already begun. As I fled through the darkening park, I could have sworn I saw shapes in the sky, vast winged things that blotted out the stars, and from deep beneath the earth came a rumbling, the stirring of something ancient and utterly alien. Ellis was right, it had begun, and I had no idea how to stop it. It was the stone that finally forced my hand. I could feel its pull even from miles away, a constant ache in the back of my mind. I know that as long as it existed, it posed a threat, a key to unlocking whatever cosmic horror Ellis and his cult were trying to unleash. With a heavy heart, I made my way back to my apartment. The place was a mess. Ellis had clearly torn it apart looking for the stone, but he hadn't found it. I retrieved it from its hiding place, wrapping it carefully in layers of cloth to avoid touching it directly. As I held it, I could feel its power thrumming through the layers of fabric. Demon whispers tickled the edges of my consciousness, promising knowledge and power beyond my wildest dreams. It took every ounce of willpower I possessed not to unwrap it, not to gaze upon its eldritch symbols. I knew what I had to do. The stone had to be destroyed, no matter the cost. The drive out to the Superstition Mountains was tense. Every passing car felt like a potential threat, and every person on the street a possible cultist. But somehow I made it to the trailhead without incident. The hike up to where the cave had been was grueling. The collapse had changed the landscape, making the terrain even more treacherous than before. But I pressed on, driven by desperation and the growing sense that time was running out. As I neared the side of the cave, the air grew heavy with an otherworldly charge. The stone in my backpack seemed to pulse with increasing urgency, as if it knew its fate was at hand. And then I saw them. Cass and his followers gathered around the pile of rubble that had once been the cave entrance. They were chanting, their voices rising and falling in that alien cadence that set my teeth on edge. At the center of it all stood Ellis, his arms raised to the sky. The air around him seemed to shimmer and distort, reality itself bending in his presence. "I was wondering when you would join us, Cody," he said without turning, his voice carrying easily over the chanting. "Come to witness the dawning of a new age." I swallowed hard, my mouth dry with fear. "I've come to end this, Ellis. Whatever it is you're trying to do, it has to stop." He turned then, and I had to stifle a gasp. His transformation was almost complete. His skin had taken on a gray, almost translucent quality, and extra joints had formed in his limbs, allowing for impossible fluid movements. But it was his eyes that truly showed how far gone he was, swirling vortexes of color that seemed to draw me in, threatening to swallow my very soul. "End it." Ellis laughs to sound like shattering glass. "You can end this, Cody. It's been in motion since before humanity crawled out of the primordial ooze. The stars are right, the gates are opening, the old ones will return, and this world will be remade in their image." As he spoke, the chanting reached a fever pitch. The ground began to shake, and I watched in horror as the rubble of the cave began to shift and move, revealing a yawning darkness beneath. "The stone," Ellis said, extending a hand that was no longer entirely human. "Give it to me, Cody, be a part of this. Witness the rebirth of the world." For a moment, I was tempted. The power radiating from Ellis, from the opening in the earth, was intoxicating to be a part of something so vast, so cosmic. It was almost overwhelming, but then I remembered the terror in the cave, the rawness of the thing we had awakened. I thought of all the people in the world, oblivious to the horror that was about to be unleashed upon them. "No," I said, surprised at the strength in my voice. "This ends now." Before Ellis or his followers could react, I pulled the stone from my backpack. For a brief moment, I saw it unveiled, a thing of angles that hurt the eye to look upon, covered in symbols that seemed to squirm and shift as I watched. Then I hurled it with all my might into the opening chasm. Ella's scream of rage was drowned out by a sound that defied description, a vast cosmic roar of fury and frustration. The ground heaved beneath our feet, and the sky above us seemed to tear open, revealing vistas of alien stars and impossible geometries. "What have you done?" Ellis howled, his form shifting and writhing as reality itself seemed to warp around him. "He's doomed us all." The cultists scattered, their chanting turned to screams of terror. From the depths of the earth came sounds of movement, a vast thing stirring from eons-long slumber. I turned and ran, my legs pumping with desperate energy. Behind me I heard Ella's voice, no longer even remotely human, calling out in that alien language. The very rocks seemed to shudder at the sound. I don't know how long I ran or how I made it back to my truck. The drive back to Phoenix was a blur of adrenaline and cosmic terror. Several times I thought I saw vast shapes in the rearview mirror, things that blotted out the stars as they moved across the sky. It's been 3 days since then. The world is in chaos. Earthquakes have leveled cities across the globe. Strange phenomena are being reported from every corner of the earth, and everyone is having them now. Dreams of sunken cities and cosmic entities, so vast they defy comprehension. I don't know if what I did stopped anything or if I just delayed the inevitable. The stone is gone, but damage may already be done. Ellis and his cult have disappeared, but I can feel them out there waiting, preparing. All I know is that the world has changed, the veil has been lifted, and we can no longer ignore the vast, uncaring universe that surrounds us. The old ones are stirring, and humanity stands on the brink of a transformation that will either elevate us to the stars or plunge us into an abyss of madness, and somehow I'm caught in the middle of it all. Whatever comes next, I know one thing for certain. Nothing will ever be the same again. The shrill ring of my satellite phone cut through the pre-dawn silence, jolting me awake. I fumbled for it in the darkness, my eyes struggling to focus on the glowing display. 4:37 a.m. dispatch. Then I grunted, sitting up in bed. Seth, we've got a situation. It was Carla Whitman, my longtime partner and the coordinator for our search and rescue team. Her voice carried an edge of urgency that immediately set me on alert. A hiker's gone missing in the Nantahala. His wife reported him overdue last night. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, fully awake now. Details? Carla asked. Carl Bennington, 52, experienced hiker, knows the area well. He was supposed to check in with his wife 2 days ago from a campsite along Miller Creek. She says he's never missed a check-in before. I stood, moving to my closet to grab my gear. When did he start his hike? 5 days ago, he was planning a week-long solo trek, mostly off-trail. His wife says he does this every year, some kind of personal challenge. Any pre-existing medical conditions? I asked, pulling on my boots. None that we know of. He's in good shape. No history of heart problems or anything like that. I nodded to myself, running through the possibilities in my mind. Even experienced hikers could get into trouble out there. A twisted ankle, a fall, or even just getting turned around in unfamiliar territory could spell disaster. Alright, I said. Now gear up and head to the trailhead.
Can you send me the coordinates for his planned route?
Already done, Carla replied. I've also got a team assembling. They'll meet you there in about 2 hours. Got it. I'll start the initial sweep and radio in if I find anything. Be careful out there, Seth, Carla added, her voice softening slightly. There's been some strange reports from that area lately. Probably just hikers spooking themselves, but keep your eyes open. I paused, my hand on the door. What kind of reports? There was a moment of hesitation on the other end. Just odd sightings, noises at night. One hiker swore he saw something big moving through the trees, but it was dark and he'd been drinking. Probably nothing, but I thought you should know. Appreciate the heads up, I said, pushing down a flicker of unease. I'll keep you posted. I ended the call and finished gearing up, my mind racing. In my nearly 2 decades with the Forest Service, I had seen just about everything these mountains could throw at a person. But there was something about Carla's tone that set me on edge. She wasn't one for ghost stories or wild speculation. As I loaded my truck and began the drive to the trailhead, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't going to be a routine search and rescue operation. The pre-dawn darkness seemed to press in on all sides, and I found myself gripping the steering wheel a little tighter than usual. The first hints of daylight were just starting to touch the eastern sky when I pulled into the empty parking area at the trailhead. I double-checked my pack, making sure I had everything I might need for an extended search. First aid kit, extra water, high-energy snacks, spare batteries for my flashlight and radio. I clipped my satellite phone to my belt and slung my rifle over my shoulder. It was rare that I needed it, but in these remote areas you never knew when you might encounter an aggressive bear or mountain lion. As I started up the trail, the forest seemed to wake up around me. Birds began their morning chorus, and the light breeze rustled through the canopy overhead. But there was something off about it all, a tension in the air that I couldn't quite place. I've spent most of my life in these woods, and I've developed a sort of sixth sense for when things aren't right. Right now, that sense was screaming at me. I pushed the feeling aside and focused on the task at hand. Find Carl Bennington, get him home safe. That was the job, and I was damn good at it. But as I moved deeper into the forest, following the coordinates of Carl's planned route, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every snapping twig, every rustle in the underbrush made me whip around searching for what? I didn't know. But something was out there, something that didn't belong. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting dappled shadows through the leaves, I reached the first waypoint on Carl's route. It was a small clearing near a bend in Miller Creek, a popular spot for hikers to set up camp. I scanned the area looking for any sign of recent activity. Well, that's when I saw it. Just at the edge of the clearing, half hidden by a fallen log, was a scrap of fabric, bright blue against the forest floor. I approached cautiously, my heart rate picking up. As I got closer, I could see that it was torn, and there were dark stains that looked unsettling like blood. I crouched down to examine it more closely, and that's when I heard it, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I spun around, rifle at the ready, but there was nothing there. Just trees and shadows. But I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my core that I was no longer alone in these woods. And whatever was out there with me was not something I had ever encountered before. I keyed my radio, my voice barely above a whisper. Carla, it's Seth. I think I found something, and I think we're gonna need a bigger team. I stood frozen, ears straining for any further sound. But the forest had gone eerily silent, even the birds had stopped their morning songs. I forced myself to take a deep breath and focus. Whatever I had heard, whatever was out there, finding Carl Bennington was still my primary objective. I carefully bagged the torn fabric as evidence and marked the location on my GPS. As I continued along Carl's planned route, I kept all my senses on high alert. The feeling of being watched intensified with each step, and I found myself constantly scanning the trees and underbrush. By midday, I had reached the area where Carl had planned to make camp on the second night of his trek. The site was undisturbed, with no sign that anyone had been there recently. This wasn't good. If Carl had stuck to his itinerary, he should have passed through here days ago. I keyed my radio again. Carla, you copy? Her response came through clearly. I'm here, Seth. What's your status? In at waypoint 3. No sign of Carl or any recent camping activity. I'm going to push on to the next site, but I've got a bad feeling about this. There was a pause before Carla replied. Understood. The backup team should be reaching your initial coordinates soon. Do you want them to try to catch up with you? I considered for a moment. Part of me wanted to back up, but another part felt an inexplicable urgency to push forward alone. Negative. Have them start a grid search from the first waypoint. We'll continue on Carl's planned route. Copy that. Be careful out there, Seth. Check in every hour. Will do. As I moved deeper into the wilderness, the terrain became more challenging. The trail all but disappeared, and I found myself scrambling over moss-covered boulders and pushing through dense thickets. The canopy overhead grew thicker, casting the forest floor into a perpetual twilight. It was nearing dusk when I reached a small clearing beside a rushing stream. This was where Carl had planned to make camp on the third night of his hike. As I approached, my flashlight beam caught something reflective near the water's edge. My heart raced as I moved closer. It was a water bottle, partially hidden under some leaves. I picked it up, examining it closely. There was a name written on the bottom in permanent marker. Carla, I radioed, my voice tight. I found Carl's water bottle at waypoint 4. No sign of him or his camp, but this confirms he made it at least this far. Understood, Carla replied. What's your plan? I looked around the clearing, my flashlight beam cutting through the growing darkness. I'm going to set up camp here for the night. It's getting too dark to continue safely. He'll start again at first light. Okay, Seth, stay alert. The rest of the team will continue searching through the night. They worked their way towards your position. I signed off and began setting up my small tent. As I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being observed. The darkness seemed to press in around me, alive with unseen presence. Just as I was about to crawl into my tent, I heard it again, that low, rumbling growl, closer this time. I snatched up my rifle, spinning around, but saw nothing in the beam of my flashlight. Sleep was elusive that night. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves had me bolt upright, heart pounding. And always, just at the edge of hearing, that deep, menacing growl. As the false light of dawn filtered through the trees, I packed up quickly, eager to be on the move. I had just shouldered my pack when I saw it. A set of tracks leading away from the clearing caught my attention. My blood ran cold as I crouched to examine them. They were like nothing I had ever seen before. Massive, easily twice the size of a bear print, with long curved claw marks gouging deep into the soft earth. And they were fresh. Whatever had made these tracks had been here in this clearing while I slept. With shaking hands, I raised my radio. "Carla, it's Seth," I said. "You need to get the team up here now and tell them to come armed." The morning air felt thick and oppressive as I followed the strange tracks deeper into the forest. They led away from Curl's planned route, veering off into a section of the Nantahala that I'd never explored before. The terrain grew steeper, the underbrush denser, and an unsettling fog began to roll in, obscuring my vision. I radioed Carla every hour as promised, but the signal grew weaker with each transmission. By midday, I could barely make out her voice through the static. "Seth, losing you, careful, strange reports." And then nothing but white noise. I was on my own now, cut off from the outside world, following a trail that led God knows where. But I couldn't turn back. Not when I might be on Carl's trail. Not when every instinct told me that something was terribly wrong in these woods. As I pushed through a particularly thick patch of rhododendrons, I stumbled into a small clearing in firs. The ground was torn up as if some massive beast had thrashed about in a frenzy. And there, caught on a broken branch, was a shred of fabric, the same bright blue as the scrap I'd found earlier. My hands trembled as I bagged the new evidence. Whatever had happened here, it had been violent. I tried not to think about what that might mean for Carl. The tracks led on down a steep ravine that plunged into darkness. I hesitated at the edge, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. But I couldn't. I took a deep breath, clicked on my flashlight, and began the treacherous descent. The air grew colder as I climbed down. The rocks were slicked with moss and condensation. The beam of my flashlight seemed to be swallowed by the darkness, barely illuminating a few feet in front of me. And all around, an oppressive silence broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing and the occasional skittering of unseen creatures in the underbrush. I don't know how long I climbed down into that abyss. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the darkness. But eventually my feet touched level ground, and I found myself in a vast underground cavern. My flashlight beam swept across the cave floor, revealing more of those massive tracks. But there was something else now. Drag marks. As if something heavy had been pulled across the ground. My stomach churned as I followed the trail deeper into the cave. The smell hit me first, a rank animal odor mixed with the metallic tang of blood. Then my light fell on something that made my heart stop. It was Carl's backpack, or what was left of it. The sturdy material had been shredded like tissue paper. Its contents were strewn across the cave floor. And beside it, partially hidden behind a rock, was a human arm torn savagely from its body. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. This was beyond anything that I'd encountered in my years of search and rescue. This was a nightmare made real. As I stood there, frozen in horror, I heard it again, a deep, guttural growl echoing through the cavern. But this time it was answered by another growl and another. There was more than one of them down here. I backed away slowly, my rifle raised, eyes straining to pierce the darkness beyond my flashlight's beam. I had to get out of here. I had to warn the others. When I was down here, it wasn't something we were equipped to handle. But as I turned to make my escape, my light caught a pair of eyes reflecting in the darkness. Large, intelligent eyes, filled with a predatory hunger that made my blood run cold. I ran like I've never run before. Scrambling up the steep incline, heedless of the rocks that tore at my hands and knees. Behind me, I could hear them coming. Their growls were growing louder, filled with the excitement of the hunt. As I burst out of the ravine and into the foggy forest, I realized with growing dread that I was hopelessly lost. In my panic, I had taken a different route out of the cave system. Nothing looked familiar. The sounds of pursuit grew closer. I picked a direction at random and ran, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but terror kept me moving. As night began to fall, I finally allowed myself to stop, collapsing behind a large fallen tree. I strained my ears listening for any sign of pursuit, but heard only the normal sounds of the forest at dusk. Had I lost them, or were they out there still, silently stalking me through the gathering darkness? As I sat there, trying to catch my breath and get my bearings, a horrifying realization dawned on me. In my blind panic, I had dropped my radio. I had no way to contact Carla or the rest of the team. I was alone in these woods, lost with nightfall approaching and unknown predators on my trail. For the first time in my career, I felt the icy grip of true fear. Whatever was out there, it had already killed one man, and now it was hunting me. Darkness fell like a shroud over the forest, bringing with it a bone-deep chill that seemed to seep into my very core. I huddled behind the fallen tree, straining my ears for any sound of pursuit. The normal nighttime sounds of the forest, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush were conspicuously absent. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the pounding of my own heart. And while I couldn't stay here, without my radio, my only hope was to find my way back to civilization, or to run into the search team. But in this darkness, with unknown predators potentially stalking me, movement was incredibly risky. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I made my decision. I had to move. Staying in one place made me an easy target, and I was already feeling the effects of exposure. I checked my pack. I still had my flashlight, some water, and a few energy bars. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. I rose slowly, every muscle screaming in protest. The adrenaline that had fueled my mad dash through the forest had faded, leaving me acutely aware of every scraped bruise and aching joint. I took a sip of water, allowing myself a moment to try to get my bearings. In the pitch darkness, with no familiar landmarks visible, I was completely disoriented. I couldn't even be sure which direction I had come from. After a moment's hesitation, I decided to head downhill. If I could find a stream, it might lead me to a larger body of water, which could then lead me out of the forest. I moved as quietly as I could, placing each foot carefully to avoid snapping twigs or rustling leaves. My flashlight remained off. The beam might make me an easy target in the darkness. Instead, I relied on my other senses, feeling my way forward, listening intently for any sound out of place. The going was painfully slow. More than once, I stumbled over hidden roots or rocks, each time freezing in terror, certain that the noise would bring those things down upon me. But the forest remained silent. As the night wore on, exhaustion began to take its toll. My movements became clumsier, my thinking foggier. Several times I caught myself beginning to nod off while leaning against a tree, jerking awake and panicking each time. I knew that to fall asleep out here would likely mean death, but my body was reaching its limits. It was during one of these moments as I shook myself awake for what felt like the 100th time that I heard it, a twig snapping somewhere off to my right. I froze, hardly daring to breathe. For several long moments there was nothing. Then another snap, closer this time. Something was moving through the forest and it was heading straight for me. I pressed myself against the trunk of a large oak, trying to make myself as small as possible. My hand tightened on my rifle, though I knew that if it was one of those creatures, the weapon would likely be useless. The sounds of movement grew closer. Whatever it wasn't trying to be quiet. I could hear branches breaking, leaves rustling, then a beam of light cut through the darkness, sweeping back and forth across the forest floor. A flashlight. Hope surged through me. Could it be the search team? But caution held me back. What if it was someone or something else? The light drew nearer and I could now make out the sound of voices. Human voices, relief flooded through me, making my knees weak. Hello? I called out, my voice hoarse and shaky. Over here. The flashlight beam swung in my direction, momentarily blinding me. I heard shouts of surprise, then the sound of running feet. Seth? Seth Reedon, is that you? I recognized the voice. It was Mitch Lawson, one of the junior members of our search and rescue team. I staggered forward, almost falling into his arms. Mitch, I gasped. Thank God we need to get out of here. Now. Whoa, easy there, Mitch said, supporting me as my legs threatened to give out. What happened to you? We've been searching for hours. I shook my head, trying to clear it. No time to explain. We need to leave. It's not safe here. Mitch exchanged a worried glance with his partner, a woman I didn't recognize. Okay, Seth, we'll get you out of here. Base camp's about 2 miles east. Can you walk? I nodded, though I wasn't entirely sure. As we began to move, Mitch keyed his radio. Base? This is Team 3. We found Seth Reedon. He is alive, but in rough shape. We're bringing him in. Carla's voice crackled over the radio, tight with worry and relief. Copy that, Team 3. Get him here fast and be careful out there. As we made our way through the dark forest, I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at every sound. I knew we weren't safe. Not yet. Those things were still out there, somewhere in the darkness, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they were watching us, waiting for their moment to strike. The long night wasn't over yet, and I feared that the true horrors were yet to come. The trek back to base camp was a blur of exhaustion and paranoia. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle in the undergrowth sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. Mitch and his partner, whose name I learned was Vanessa, kept shooting worried glances my way, but I was too focused on our surroundings to offer any explanation. As we neared the camp, I began to relax slightly. The familiar glow of electric lanterns through the trees was a welcome sight. A beacon of civilization in this wilderness that had suddenly become so alien and threatening. Carla was waiting for us at the edge of the camp, her face a mask of concern. As soon as she saw me, she rushed forward. Seth, thank God you're all right. What happened out there? I had on my mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. Now that I was back in the relative safety of the camp, surrounded by people and light, the events of the past day seemed almost unreal. How could I explain what I'd seen, what I'd experienced? Let's get him to the medical tent, Carla said, noticing my state. He needs to be checked out. The next hour passed in a haze of medical examinations and debriefings. I was dehydrated, exhausted, and covered in cuts and bruises, but otherwise physically fine. It was when they started asking about what had happened that things got complicated. I told them everything, the strange tracks, the shredded backpack, the remains I'd found in the cave. I described the creatures as best I could, though I'd only caught glimpses, large, fast, with a strength that defied belief. As I spoke, I could see the doubt in their eyes. They were looking at me like I was crazy, and maybe I was. Maybe the stress and isolation had caused me to hallucinate, to transform ordinary animals into monsters. But I knew what I'd seen. I knew it was real. Seth, Carla said gently after I'd finished my story, "You've been through a traumatic experience. Sometimes in high-stress situations, our minds can play tricks on us." "No," I cut her off, my voice firm. "I know what you're thinking, but I'm not crazy. Something is out there, something dangerous. It's already killed at least one person." An uncomfortable silence fell over the tent. Finally, Mitch spoke up. "What about the evidence you collected?" "The fabric samples." I blinked, suddenly remembering. In the chaos of my escape from the cave, I'd completely forgotten about the evidence bags in my pack. I scrambled to retrieve them, handing them over to Carla with shaking hands. She examined them closely, her brow furrowed. "This does look like it could be from Carl's jacket, and these stains will need to get them analyzed, but they could be blood." A ripple of unease went through the group. This was tangible evidence that something had happened to Carl, something violent. "What about the tracks you saw?" Mitch asked. "Did you get any photos?" I shook my head, frustration welling up. No, I was too focused on following them. I should have documented everything better. I know that I've never seen anything like this before. I wasn't thinking clearly. Carla placed a hand on my shoulder. "It's okay, Seth. You did what you could in a difficult situation. The important thing is that you're safe now." And I knew I wouldn't be safe, nor would any of us, until we figured out what was really going on in these woods. "We'll need to go back," I said, sitting up straighter. "We need to find that cave system. Whatever killed Carl, whatever's out there, that's where it's coming from." The others exchanged worried glances. "Seth," Carla said gently, "you're in no condition to go back out there. We'll send out search teams in the morning, but you need to rest." I wanted to argue, but exhaustion was quickly overtaking me. As much as I hated to admit it, Carla was right. I wouldn't be any use to anyone in this state. "Fine," I conceded. "But first thing in the morning, I'm leading a team back out there. Whatever's happening, we need to stop it before anyone else gets hurt." Carla nodded, though I could see the reservation in her eyes. "We'll talk about it in the morning. For now, get some sleep." As I lay in my tent that night, sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those massive tracks, heard that bone-chilling growl, and underneath it all was a gnawing sense of guilt. Carl was still out there somewhere, or what was left of him, and who knew how many others might be in danger from whatever was lurking in those woods. I must have dozed off eventually, because I was jolted awake by the sound of shouting outside my tent. I scrambled out, my heart racing, to find the camp in chaos. "What's going on?" I asked, grabbing the arm of a passing ranger. His face was pale in the early morning light. "Another hiker's gone missing, and we found something at the edge of the camp." He pointed toward a group of people gathered near the tree line. As I approached, the crowd parted, and I saw what had caused the commotion. There, gouged deep into the trunk of a massive oak tree, were 3 long parallel claw marks. They were identical to the tracks I'd seen the day before, and they were fresh. Whatever I'd encountered in those caves, it had followed me back to camp, and now it was hunting again. The discovery of the claw marks sent a wave of panic through the camp. Suddenly, my story didn't seem so far-fetched. Carla quickly organized an emergency meeting of all search and rescue personnel. "All right, listen up," she said, her voice tense but controlled. "As of now, we're dealing with an unknown predator in the area. All solo expeditions are suspended. We move in groups of no less than 4, and everyone carries a firearm." She turned to me. "Seth, I need you to lead a team back to where you found Carl's belongings. If there's any chance he's still alive, or if we can find any more evidence of what we're dealing with, that's our best bet." I nodded, a mix of determination and dread settling on my stomach. "You'll do it. But we need to be prepared. Whatever this thing is, it's unlike anything we've dealt with before. We spent the next hour gearing up heavy-duty hiking boots, reinforced clothing, powerful flashlights, and high-caliber rifles. It felt more like we were preparing for war than a search and rescue mission. The town consisted of Mitch, Vanessa, and a seasoned ranger named Hank. As we prepared to head out, Carla pulled me aside. "Seth," she said, her voice low, "I know you've been through hell, but I need you to keep a clear head out there. Your team is relying on you." I met her gaze steadily. "I know I won't let them down." As we set out into the forest, the morning mist still clinging to the ground, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The woods seemed different now, threatening. Every shadow could be hiding a monstrous predator. We moved slowly, deliberately, constantly scanning our surroundings. I led him along the path I'd taken 2 days ago, though without my GPS unit I had to rely on memory and my tracking skills. It was nearing midday when we found the entrance to the ravine. I paused, my heart racing as I remembered my panicked flight from the caves below. "This is it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "The cave system is down there." Rich peered over the edge, his face pale. "That's a hell of a climb." "You sure about this, Seth?" I nodded grimly. "You don't have a choice. Whatever killed Carl, whatever's been stalking these woods, this is where it came from." We began our descent, moving with agonizing slowness to avoid loosening rocks or losing our footing. The temperature dropped noticeably as we climbed down, and the air took on a damp, musty smell. Finally, we reached the bottom. The entrance to the cave loomed before us, a gaping maw of darkness. We clicked on our flashlights, the beams seeming feeble against the oppressive blackness. "Stay close," I warned, "and be ready for anything." We moved into the cave, our footsteps echoing ominously. The smell hit us first. That same rank animal odor I'd encountered before, but stronger now. Mixed with it was the unmistakable stench of decay. As we rounded a bend in the tunnel, our lights fell on a scene of carnage. The floor was littered with bones, some animal, some disturbingly human-like. Scraps of cloth and shredded backpacks were strewn about. Vanessa gagged, turning away. "Oh God," she choked out. "What could have done this?" Before I could answer, a low growl echoed through the cave. We spun around, rifles raised, to see a pair of glowing eyes reflecting our flashlight beam. For a moment, everything was still. Then, with a roar that shook loose rocks from the ceiling, the creature charged. Time seemed to slow as it burst into the circle of our flashlight beams. It was like nothing I had ever seen before. Massive, easily 8 feet tall when reared up on its hind legs. Its body was covered in thick, matted fur, and its face was a nightmarish blend of bear and something almost human. But its eyes, the worst part, gleamed with an intelligence that was terrifyingly out of place on such a bestial form. "Fire!" I yelled, snapping out of my shock. Our rifles roared in the confined space of the cave, the muzzle flashes momentarily blinding us. The creature staggered under the impact of the bullets, letting out a bellow of pain and rage that made my ears ring. But it didn't go down. Instead, it charged forward with impossible speed. Hank, who was at the front of our group, didn't even have time to scream before the creature was on him. With one swap of its massive claws, it sent him flying across the cave. He hit the wall with a sickening crunch and crumpled to the ground, unmoving. "Fall back," I shouted, continuing to fire as we retreated deeper into the cave. The creature pursued us, seemingly more enraged than hurt by our bullets. Its roars echoed off the cave walls, disorienting us as we ran blindly through the darkness. Suddenly, Mitch cried out. I turned to see him stumble, his ankle twisting on a loose rock. The creature was on him in an instant, its jaws closing around his leg. Without thinking, I charged forward, slanting the butt of my rifle into the side of the creature's head. It released Mitch with a snarl, turning its attention to me. For a moment, we locked eyes. I saw something there, not just animal hunger, but a cold, calculating intelligence. This wasn't just a predator, it was something more. Then the moment passed and it lunged for me. I dove to the side, feeling the rush of air as its claws barely missed my face. I rolled to my feet, firing wildly, more to keep it at bay than with any hope of killing it. This way, Vanessa called out. She'd found a narrow crevice in the cave wall, just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. We didn't hesitate. I grabbed Mitch, hauling him to his feet, then we half ran, half stumbled towards the opening. The creature was right behind us, so close I could feel its hot breath on my neck. Vanessa went through first, then helped pull Mitch through. I turned, firing my last few rounds into the creature's face, buying just enough time to squeeze into the crevice. The creature roared in frustration, clawing at the opening, but it was too large to follow. Its massive paw swiped at us, catching my leg and leaving deep gashes. We collapsed on the other side, gasping for breath. The creature's enraged bellow slowly faded as it moved away, unable to reach us. Is everyone okay? I managed to gasp out. Mitch groaned, clutching his mangled leg. I think it's broken, he said through gritted teeth. I wasn't much better off. The gashes on my leg were deep and I could feel blood soaking through my pants. Vanessa seemed to be the least injured, with just some cuts and bruises. We need to get out of here, she said, her voice shaking. We need to warn the others. I nodded grimly. You're right, but first I paused, steeling myself. We need to go back for Hank. The looks on their faces told me what I already knew in my heart. There was no way Hank had survived that impact. But we couldn't leave him here, not in this place. I go, I said. You two stay here. You hear that thing coming back, don't wait for me. Just run. Before they could argue, I squeezed back through the crevice. The main cavern was eerily quiet now. I moved as quickly and quietly as I could to where Hank had fallen. He was exactly where we'd left him, his body broken and still. I closed his eyes gently, murmuring a quiet apology. Then, ignoring the screaming pain in my leg, I hoisted him over my shoulder. The journey back through the crevice was agonizing. Every movement sent waves of pain through my injured leg, and Hank's weight threatened to overbalance me. But finally, I made it through. Vanessa and Mitch stared at me in shock as I emerged with Hank's body. Without a word, Vanessa moved to help me lower him gently to the ground. Now what? Mitch asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts. We were injured, trapped in an unknown part of the cave system, with a monster unlike anything we'd ever encountered hunting us. Now, I said, we find a way out. We make sure that thing never hurts anyone else ever again. The narrow passageway we found ourselves in seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness. Most slowly, painfully, our injuries and the weight of Hank's body slowing us down. The sound of dripping water echoed ominously, and the air grew colder and damper the further we went. Wait, Vanessa said suddenly, holding up her hand. Do you hear that? We froze, straining our ears. At first I heard nothing but the steady drip of water. Then faintly I caught it, the sound of rushing water. An underground river, I breathed. If we can find it, it might lead us out. It gave us renewed energy. We pushed on, following the sound. The passage gradually widened, opening into a vast cavern, and that cutting through the center of it was a swift-moving river. Look, Mitch pointed with his good leg.
Daylight.
Sure enough, far down the river I could see a faint glimmer of natural light. An exit, but our relief was short-lived. From behind us came that, and now familiar growl. The creature had found another way in. We need to move now, I shouted. We splashed into the frigid water, the current immediately threatening to sweep us off our feet. I gripped Hank's body tightly, determined not to let it go. The creature burst into the cavern just as we reached the middle of the river. It paused at the water's edge, pacing back and forth, its eyes never leaving us. Then, with a roar that shook loose stones from the cavern ceiling, it plunged into the water after us. The next few minutes were a blur of freezing water, jagged rocks, and blind terror. The current carried us swiftly towards the exit. But the creature was gaining on us. Its powerful limbs cut through the water with terrifying efficiency. Just as we neared the exit, a submerged rock caught my injured leg. I cried out in pain, losing my grip on Hank. I watched in horror as his body was swept away by the current, disappearing into the daylight beyond. The creature was upon us now. In desperation, I grabbed a loose rock from the riverbed and hurled it with all my strength. By some miracle, it struck the creature directly between the eyes. It reared back, momentarily stunned, giving us the chance we needed. We burst out of the cave into blinding sunlight. The river carried us over a small waterfall and into a deep pool below. As we surfaced, gasping for air, I looked back to see the creature framed in the cave exit. For a moment, our eyes met again. Then, with a final earth-shaking roar, it retreated back into the darkness. We dragged ourselves to the shore, collapsing on the bank. For a long moment, we just lay there, too exhausted and shell-shocked to speak. Finally, Vanessa broke the silence. What was that thing? I shook my head at a loss for words. I don't know, but we need to make sure it never leaves those caves again. It took us hours to find our way back to base camp. By the time we stumbled into the clearing, night had fallen. The camp erupted into a flurry of activity as soon as we were spotted. Carla rushed to meet us, her face a mix of relief and horror as she took in our battered state. What happened? Where's Hank? I met her gaze steadily. Hank didn't make it, and we've got a bigger problem than we ever imagined. Over the next few hours, we recounted our terrifying experience in the caves. The team was immediately dispatched to recover Hank's body from the river, and plans were made to seal off the cave system. But I knew that wouldn't be enough. Whatever that creature was, it was too intelligent, too powerful to be contained forever. And if there was one, there could be more. As dawn broke over the forest, I stood at the edge of the camp, staring into the trees. The woods that had once been my second home now felt alien and threatening. I meant that my life and the lives of everyone who ventured into these mountains would never be the same. The horror we had encountered in those caves would haunt me for the rest of my days. But more than that, it had opened my eyes to a terrifying truth that there are things in this world beyond our understanding, predators that lurk in the dark places waiting. And as I watched the sunrise over the Nantahala, I made a silent vow. I'll dedicate my life to unraveling this mystery, to protecting others from the horrors that lurked in the wilderness, because now I knew the truth. The most dangerous monsters aren't always the ones we can see. My name is Everett Larkin, and this is the story of how my life in a sleepy border town turned into a waking nightmare. It all began in the summer of 2003 in a place most people have never heard of, Mecco, Arizona. Mecco isn't the kind of town that makes it onto postcards or travel brochures. It's a tiny speck on the map right on the Mexican border where the desert stretches out as far as the eye can see. We had one main street, a handful of shops, and more cacti than people. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, whether you wanted them to or not. I lived in Mecco my whole life, working as a mechanic at Larkin's Auto Repair, a name I inherited from my old man along with his toolbox and his talent for coaxing life back into engines that should have given up the ghost years ago. The garage was more than just a workplace for me. It was my sanctuary, a place where the monotony of small-town life faded away, replaced by the satisfying clank of metal on metal and the smell of motor oil. I wasn't married, I didn't have kids. My family consisted of an old mutt named Rusty, a loyal companion who followed me everywhere, his tail wagging like a metronome, keeping time to the rhythm of our simple life. Rusty was getting on in years, his muzzle graying and his steps a little slower, but his eyes still sparkled with the same intelligence and devotion they always had. My best friend, Arthur Milburn, lives just a few blocks away. We'd known each other since we were kids, thick as thieves from the day we met in elementary school. Arthur was always the joker of the two of us, quick with a laugh and always ready with a story. He worked as a high school history teacher, filling young minds with tales of the past while I filled old cars with new parts. Life in Nurko had a predictable pattern, days at the garage, evenings often spent with Arthur, sharing a couple of beers in my backyard or his living room, swapping stories and laughing at the same old jokes. It wasn't exciting, but it was comfortable, safe. At least that's what I thought. I remember the night everything changed, like it was yesterday. It was a Tuesday in late July. The kind of evening where the heat of the day still hung in the air, making everything feel slow and heavy. I was in my garage, tinkering with an old Chevy that had seen better days. Rusty sprawled out on the cool concrete floor nearby. The sound of footsteps on gravel made me look up. Arthur was walking up the driveway and I could tell something was off. His usual easy grin was replaced by a furrowed brow, and he had a folded newspaper clutched tightly in his hand. "Ev," he said as he approached, his voice tight with emotion I couldn't quite place. "You see this?" He thrust the paper at me, and I wiped my greasy hands on a rag before taking it. The headline jumped out at me: "String of disappearances baffles local authorities." I scanned the article quickly, my unease growing with each word. 3 people had vanished without a trace in the past month, all from the outskirts of town. The police had no leads, no witnesses. It was as if these people had simply ceased to exist. "Yeah, I heard something about this down at the diner," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "But people go missing all the time, right? Could be anything." Arthur shook his head vehemently. "No, man, this is different. I talked to Julie, who works the night shift at the diner. Her cousin was one of the ones who disappeared, and she swears she saw something weird in the woods a few nights ago." I raised an eyebrow. "Weird how?" Arthur leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "She wouldn't say exactly, just that it wasn't human." I couldn't help but roll my eyes. Arthur had always loved a good conspiracy theory, always ready to believe in the extraordinary. "Come on, Art. It was probably just a bear or something. You know how people's imaginations can run wild, especially at night? A bear that walks on 2 legs and has glowing eyes." Arthur countered, his expression dead serious. "I don't think so, man. There's something out there, something not natural." I wanted to argue to tell him he was being ridiculous, but there was something in his eyes, a fear I'd never seen before, that stopped me. Instead, I just nodded slowly, folding the newspaper and setting it aside. "All right, well, keep me posted if you hear anything else," I said, trying to lighten the mood. "In the meantime, want a beer? I've got a couple cold ones in the fridge." Arthur seemed to relax a bit at that, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "Yeah, that sounds good. Thanks." As we sat in my garage, sipping our beers and trying to talk about normal things, the weather, the latest town gossip, the Diamondbacks' chances this season, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled over me. It was like a storm on the horizon, distant but unmistakable, promising to change everything in its path. Little did I know that storm was already upon us, and nothing in Nurko would ever be the same again. In the days that followed Arthur's visit, I tried to push the conversation about the disappearances to the back of my mind. I focused on my work at the garage, losing myself in the familiar routines of oil changes and carburetor adjustments. But the unease lingered, like a persistent itch I couldn't quite scratch. The town was changing too. I noticed it in the wary glances people exchanged on the street, in the hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when you walked into the diner. A fear was creeping into Nako, silent but palpable. It was about a week later when I experienced something that shook my skepticism to its core. I was out for my usual evening walk with Rusty, following a regular route that skirted the edge of the woods on the outskirts of town. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep purples and oranges. Suddenly Rusty froze. His ears perked up and a low growl rumbled in his chest. I tugged gently on his leash. "Come on, boy, what's the matter?" But Rusty wouldn't budge. His eyes were fixed on something in the woods, something I couldn't see. The growl grew louder and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I strained my eyes, peering into the gathering darkness between the trees. For a moment I thought I saw something. A flicker of movement. A pair of eyes reflecting the last light of day. But it was gone so quickly I couldn't be sure it wasn't just my imagination playing tricks on me. "Rusty, let's go," I said. My voice sharper now, tinged with an anxiety I didn't want to admit. I pulled harder on the leash and finally Rusty turned away from the woods. But he kept looking back as we hurried home, his hackles raised. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment in my mind, trying to convince myself that it was nothing. Just an animal, probably. A coyote, maybe. But deep down I knew it was something more. Something that didn't belong in our quiet little town. The next day, I called Arthur. "Hey, you free tonight? I think we need to talk." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Yeah, I'm free." "Everything okay?" "I'm not sure," I admitted. "Just come over after dinner, alright?" Arthur arrived at my place around 8, a 6-pack of beer in hand. We sat out on my small back porch, the night air still warm from the day's heat. I told him about what happened with Rusty, about the feeling I couldn't shake. Arthur listened intently, his face growing more serious with each word. When I finished, he let out a long, slow breath. "I nodded," he said quietly. I knew there was something out there. "But what?" I asked, frustration creeping into my voice. "What the hell could it be, Art? This isn't some big city where people just disappear. This is Nako. We know every damn pebble in this town." Arthur took a long swig of his beer before answering. "I've been doing some digging," he said, looking into old stories, local legends. "There's always been talk about something in these woods. The old-timers call it El Caminante, the Wanderer." I scoffed. "Come on, Art, you're not seriously buying into some campfire ghost story, are you?" "I'm not saying I believe it," Arthur defended. "I'm just saying, maybe there's some truth behind the legend. Maybe there's something out there that's been around a lot longer than we have." We talked late into the night, spinning theories and dismissing them just as quickly. By the time Arthur left, we hadn't come to any conclusions. But we had made a decision. We were going to investigate. The plan was simple, or so we thought. We'd wait for a moonless night, grab some flashlights and supplies, and head into the woods where Julie had claimed to see the thing. It was reckless, probably stupid, but the need to know, to understand what was happening to our town overrode any sense of self-preservation. The night came about a week later. The sky was overcast, blocking out what little starlight might have filtered through. Arthur showed up at my door just after midnight, dressed in dark clothes and carrying a backpack. "You sure about this?" I asked, even as I grabbed my own pack. Arthur nodded, his face set with determination. "We need answers either one way or another." We drove to the edge of town in silence, parking my old pickup where the road gave way to dirt trails. The woods loomed before us, a wall of darkness that seemed to swallow our flashlight beams. "Stick close," I muttered to Arthur as we started down the trail. Easy to get turned around out here. The forest was alive with nighttime sounds, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, the hoot of an owl somewhere in the distance. But underneath it all was a strange silence. as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. We walked for what felt like hours, our flashlights cutting through the darkness, revealing nothing but trees and more trees. The air grew thick and oppressive, heavy with moisture and the scent of decaying leaves. Maybe we should head back, I suggested, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet. This is starting to feel like a wild goose chase, but Arthur wasn't listening. He had stopped dead in his tracks, flashlight beam fixed on a point just ahead of us. "Dev," he whispered, his voice tight with fear. "Do you see that?" I followed his gaze and my blood ran cold. There, reflecting our flashlight beams, were two eyes. They were too high off the ground to belong to any normal animal and too far apart to be human. For a moment we all stood frozen, Arthur and I, and whatever it was that was watching us from the darkness. "Who's there?" Arthur called out, his voice shaking slightly. There was no answer. Instead there was a rustling sound and the eyes began to move. They were coming closer. "What the hell is that?" I hissed, taking an involuntary step backward. Arthur, always the braver of us two, took a step forward. It was a mistake. Whatever it was, it didn't like the movement. There was a sudden explosive sound of undergrowth being trampled, and the thing bolted. We heard the heavy thud of its footsteps as it crashed away through the forest. We stood there in stunned silence for several long moments, our hearts pounding. Finally, Arthur spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Did you see it? That thing was huge." I nodded, unable to form words. The fear that had been simmering in the pit of my stomach for weeks had suddenly boiled over into full-blown terror. "Let's get out of here," I managed to say, already turning back the way we had come. Arthur didn't argue. We practically ran back to the truck, neither of us speaking until we were safely inside with the doors locked. As we drove back into town, the reality of what we had seen or thought we had seen began to sink in. "We can't tell anyone about this," Arthur said suddenly. "They'll think we're crazy." I nodded in agreement, but a part of me wondered if maybe we were crazy. Maybe the fear and the darkness had played tricks on our minds. But deep down I knew better. Whatever was out there in those woods, it was real and it was far from over. Life in Naco took on a surreal quality after that night in the woods. On the surface, everything seemed normal. I still went to work at the garage. Arthur still taught his history classes. The sun still rose and set over the desert. But underneath it all was a current of fear, a shared secret that Arthur and I carried with us everywhere we went. We tried to go about our lives as usual, but our encounter in the forest haunted us. We'd meet up in the evenings, speaking in hushed tones about what we'd seen, trying to make sense of it all. We scoured the internet for similar sightings, dug through old newspaper archives at the library, looking for any clue that might explain what was happening in our town. As the days passed, the sightings increased. More people reported strange noises in the night, glimpses of something large moving at the edge of town. The local paper ran story after story about the Nico beast, as they had taken to calling it. Some dismissed it as mass hysteria, product of small-town boredom. Others were convinced it was real, and the fear in town grew palpable. Then on a warm Tuesday evening, everything changed. I'm there home trying to distract myself with a baseball game on TV when my phone rang. It was Clara, Arthur's wife. Her voice was frantic, choked with tears. "Everett, is Arthur with you?" she asked, her words coming out in a rush. "No," I replied, a cold feeling settling in my stomach. "I haven't seen him since this morning." "What's wrong?" "He went out for a walk after dinner," Clara said, her voice breaking. "He said he needed some air, but he hasn't come back, have you?" "It's been hours." He's not answering his phone. "I'm scared." I tried to reassure her, told her I'd be right over, but my mind was already racing. Arthur knew better than to go out alone, especially at night. We'd made a pact after our experience in the woods. Something was very wrong. I grabbed my keys and rushed over to Arthur's house. Clara was standing on the porch, hugging herself, her eyes red from crying. I gave her a quick hug before turning to the police officers who had just arrived before me. They took our statements, asking the usual questions. When was the last time we saw him? Did he have any reason to leave? Any enemies? But I could see in their eyes that they were thinking the same thing we all were. Arthur's disappearance was connected to the others. The next few days were a blur of search parties and sleepless nights. We combed the woods, calling out Arthur's name until our voices were hoarse. The police brought in dogs, helicopters, every resource they had, but it was as if Arthur had simply vanished into thin air. As the days turned into weeks with no sign of Arthur, I felt myself slipping into a dark place. The guilt was overwhelming. I should have been with him. I should have done more to figure out what was happening in our town. Now, my best friend was gone, and I was helpless to do anything about it. But underneath the guilt and grief was something else, a determination that grew stronger with each passing day. I couldn't just sit around and do nothing. I owed it to Arthur, to Clara, to everyone in Nico who lived in fear of the thing in the woods. So I made a decision. I was going to find out what happened to Arthur, no matter what it took, even if it meant facing the creature alone. The decision to take matters into my own hands wasn't an easy one. I knew the risks, knew that I might be walking into the same fate that had befallen Arthur and the others. But the alternative, doing nothing and letting whatever was out there continue to prey on our town, was unthinkable. I started my preparations methodically as I would approach fixing a particularly tricky engine. I gathered supplies, a sturdy backpack, a high-powered flashlight, extra batteries, a first aid kit, water, energy bars, a compass, and a map of the area. I also packed a hunting knife. Not that I had any illusions about being able to fight off whatever was out there, but it made me feel a little less helpless. The hardest part was deciding what to do about Rusty. A part of me wanted to bring him along. His keen senses and unwavering loyalty could be invaluable. But the memory of his fear that night on our walk and the thought of putting him in danger made me decide against it. I arranged for my neighbor, Mrs. Hernandez, to look after him while I was gone. The night before I planned to set out, I sat down and wrote 2 letters. One was to Clara, explaining what I was doing and why, asking for her forgiveness if I didn't return. The other was to the local sheriff, detailing everything Arthur and I had seen and experienced. I sealed both in envelopes and left them on my kitchen table. If I didn't come back, at least someone would know the truth. I set out just before dawn, when the sky was still dark but with a hint of light on the eastern horizon. The town was quiet, most of its residents still asleep, unaware of the danger that lurked in the surrounding wilderness. I drove my truck to the same spot where Arthur and I had parked that fateful night. Then I shouldered my pack and set off into the woods. The forest looked different in the growing light of day, less menacing but no less mysterious. I tried to retrace our steps from that night, looking for any sign of where the creature might have gone, but the woods had long since erased any tracks or trail it might have left. As I pushed deeper into the forest, the trees grew denser, the underbrush thicker. The chirping of birds and the rustling of small animals were the only sounds apart from my own labored breathing and the crunch of leaves under my boots. Despite the growing heat of the day, I felt a chill run down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I walked for hours, stopping occasionally to check my map and compass, to eat an energy bar or take a swig of water. By midday, I had covered several miles of rough terrain, but found nothing out of the ordinary, no strange tracks, no signs of a struggle, nothing to indicate that anything larger than a deer had passed through these woods. As the sun began to dip toward the western horizon, I knew I had to make a decision. Pushing on through the night was dangerous. I could easily get lost or injure myself in the darkness, but the thought of making camp and being vulnerable while I slept was equally unappealing. In the end, practicality won out. I found a small clearing, set up a basic camp, and built a small fire. As I sat there watching the flames dance and listening to the night sounds of the forest, I couldn't help but think of Arthur. Was he out here somewhere, lost and alone, or had something worse befallen him? I must have dozed off at some point because I was suddenly jolted awake by a sound. It was faint, barely audible over the crackling of the dying fire, but unmistakable, a low rumbling growl unlike anything I'd ever heard before. My heart pounded. I scrambled to my feet, fumbling for my flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the trees at the edge of the clearing. For a moment, I saw nothing. Then a movement caught my eye. Something large was moving through the underbrush, just beyond the reach of my light. I caught a glimpse of matted fur and eyes reflecting the firelight. Then it was gone, melting back into the shadows as if it had never been there. I stood there, frozen, my flashlight beam shaking as I swept it back and forth across the tree line. But whatever I had seen, or thought I had seen, didn't reappear. Sleep was out of the question after that. I spent the rest of the night with my back to the fire, jumping at every sound. My knife clutched tightly in my hand. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, I made a grim realization. I wasn't the hunter here. I was the prey. And whatever was out there was watching me, waiting for its moment to strike. The encounter in the night left me shaken, but more determined than ever. As I broke camp and continued my trek deeper into the woods, my senses were on high alert. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves could be a sign of the creature's presence. I pushed on through the day, following game trails and dry creek beds, always searching for any sign of Arthur or the others who had disappeared. The forest seemed to grow wilder and more primeval with each passing hour. The trees here were older, their gnarled branches reaching out like grasping fingers. The underbrush was thick and tangled, making progress slow and difficult. As the day wore on, I began to notice other things, strange markings on tree trunks, too high up and too deliberate to have been made by any normal animal, tufts of coarse dark fur caught on thorny bushes, and once disturbingly, what looked like the remains of a recent kill, bones scattered and broken in a way that spoke of immense strength. The sun was setting again when I finally found something concrete. In a small clearing, half hidden by ferns, was a scrap of fabric. My heart leapt into my throat as I recognized it, a piece of the plaid shirt Arthur had been wearing the night he disappeared. I was close. I could feel it. Setting up camp that night was a nerve-wracking experience. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound a potential threat. I kept my fire small, not wanting to draw attention, but needing its light and warmth as a barrier against the encroaching darkness. It was nearing midnight when I heard it, a low guttural sound, like a growl, but not quite. It was more like a deep, resonant vibration that made the hair on my arms stand up. I grabbed at my flashlight, my heart pounding, and scanned the trees surrounding my small camp. That's when I saw them, a pair of eyes gleaming in the darkness, reflecting the firelight. They were too high off the ground to be any normal animal and too wide set to be human. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking, brandishing the flashlight like a weapon. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Arthur, is that you?" The eyes moved closer, and then I saw it clearly for the first time. It was a hulking figure, easily 7 feet tall, covered in dark matted fur. Its face was a nightmarish blend of human and wolf features, elongated fangs and a snout that twitched as it sniffed the air. This was no bear or mountain lion. This was something else entirely, something that shouldn't exist. "Arthur?" I called again, desperation creeping into my voice. Part of me hoped, irrationally, that this monster might somehow be my friend transformed. The creature let out a sound halfway between a growl and a roar and charged. I reacted instinctively, grabbing a burning branch from the fire and swinging it in a wide arc. The beast recoiled from the flames, snarling, its eyes reflecting a terrifying intelligence. I took advantage of its momentary hesitation and ran. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. I could hear the creature behind me, its heavy footfalls shaking the ground. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs felt like lead. But the sound of pursuit never faded. In desperation, I veered off the barely visible trail, plunging into a thicket of thorny bushes. The branches tore at my clothes and skin, but I pushed through, driven by pure survival instinct. Finally, I burst out of the thicket and found myself at the edge of a steep ravine. Without thinking, I half ran, half slid down the incline, loose rocks and soil cascading around me. I lost my footing near the bottom and tumbled the rest of the way, coming to a painful stop at the base of the ravine. For a moment I lay there, dazed and aching. Then I heard the sound of something large moving through the bushes at the top of the ravine. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the pain, and looked around frantically for somewhere to hide. There, a few yards away, was the dark mouth of a cave. Without hesitation, I dove inside, pressing myself against the cold stone wall just inside the entrance. I held my breath, listening. I could hear the creature moving about at the top of the ravine, sniffing the air. But to my horror, I heard the sound of it starting to make its way down the slope. It was following my trail. I pushed myself deeper into the cave, my hands scraping against rough stone as I felt my way forward in the pitch darkness. The cave narrowed, forcing me to crouch and then crawl. I could hear the creature entering the cave behind me, its breathing echoed off the stone walls. Just when I thought I could go no further, my hand met empty air. The tunnel opened up into a larger chamber. I pulled myself forward and then froze. There, in the faint light filtering in from some unseen opening above, I saw them. Bones, piles of bones, some old and bleached white, others still with scraps of flesh clinging to them, and among them, glinting in the dim light, was a familiar object, Arthur's watch. A wave of nausea and grief washed over me. This was where it brought them. This was where it fed. I had no time to process this horror because at that moment, the creature entered the chamber. It filled the entrance, its massive form blocking out what little light there was. I was trapped. As it advanced towards me, I backed up until I felt the cold stone of the cave wall against my back. This was it. This was how it would end. But then something unexpected happened. The creature stopped. It tilted its head, regarding me with those intelligent and human eyes. And then, to my utter shock, it spoke. "You friend of Arthur?" The voice was rough, guttural, as if human speech was foreign to it. But there was no mistaking the words. I nodded, too stunned to speak. The creature made a sound that might have been a sigh. Arthur, a good man, tried to help but couldn't control his hunger. My mind reeled. This thing, this monster, had been trying to help Arthur, hadn't it? What are you? I managed to ask. The creature was silent for a long moment. Then it said, "Cursed, trapped between man and beast. Hunger. Always hunger." As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could see the creature more clearly. Despite its fearsome appearance, there was something almost sorrowful in its stance. Arthur found me, it continued. He thought he could cure it, but the curse was too strong. Lost control. Killed him. Killed others. Can't stop. I felt a mix of emotions, fear, anger, pity. Is there any way to break the curse? The creature shook its massive head and tried everything. Nothing works. Only death can end it. We stood there in silence. Predator and prey, locked in a moment of understanding. Then slowly the creature backed away from me. Go, it growled, leave this place, never return. Next time, might not be able to stop. I didn't need to be told twice. I edged past the creature, my heart pounding, and made my way back through the tunnel. As I emerged from the cave, I heard the creature's voice one last time. "Remember, Arthur, good man, tell his story." I ran. I ran until my legs gave out, until I burst out of the woods and onto the road where I'd left my truck. As I drove back to town, my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. I had found the truth, but it was a truth I could never share. Who would believe me? Who would understand the tragedy of a creature cursed to kill, and of the friend who tried to save it? In the days that followed, I told the authorities that I had found evidence that Arthur and the others had been attacked by a large predator, possibly a bear. I gave Claire Arthur's watch, telling her I'd found it in the woods. It was all I could do. Life in Nucko slowly returned to normal. The disappearances stopped. People began to relax, dismissing the whole thing as a strange but passing tragedy. But I knew the truth, and on quiet nights when the wind blows just right, I sometimes think I can hear a mournful howl echoing from the distant woods. A reminder of the thin line between man and beast, and of the friend who gave his life trying to bridge that gap. I've often thought about going back, about trying to find a way to end the creature's curse. But I know that would be foolish. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, some curses better left unbroken. So I stay in Naka, keeping watch over the town, guardian of a secret I could never share. And I remember Arthur, teacher, friend, and in the end a man who gave his life trying to help a monster find its humanity. The early morning fog lingered like a ghostly veil over the dense pines of Black River National Park. I sipped my lukewarm coffee, staring blankly at the ancient map pinned to the wall of the ranger station. The park had been my home for the past 10 years, a sanctuary away from the chaos of city life. My name is Jebediah Ingram, but folks around here just call me Jeb. Being a park ranger isn't just a job, it's a calling. I have always had a knack for understanding the wilderness, feeling its pulse. Every tree, every rock, every stream tells a story. And on this particular day, the forest seemed different, uneasy. Maybe it was the series of strange incidents over the past few weeks, missing hikers, unexplained animal deaths, and unsettling sounds at night. The park had seen its fair share of mysteries, but nothing like this. As I traced the familiar contours of the map with my finger, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The coffee in my mug had gone cold, forgotten as my mind wandered through the possibilities. Could it be a rogue bear? A pack of wolves venturing too close to human territory? Or was it something else entirely? My reverie was interrupted by the sound of tires crunching on gravel outside. Moments later, my colleague Morton Reyes burst into the station, his face pale and drawn. "Jeb, you need to come with me," he said.
It's bad.
Morton was new and had been here a couple of months. A city boy with a passion for nature, eager to learn, but today he looked as though he had seen a ghost. I followed him out to his truck, the engine already running. We drove in silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. The trees blurred by in a mix of green and brown, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers in the morning mist. I tried to catch Martin's eye to gauge the severity of the situation, but his gaze remained fixed on the winding road ahead. Finally, Martin pulled over near a secluded trail that hardly anyone used. "It's just up ahead," he said, his voice trembling. As we hiked deeper into the woods, the air grew thick with tension. The birds were silent, an eerie stillness enveloping us. And then I saw it, a clearing stained with blood. Grotesque scene of carnage, the remains of what looked like a deer, but it was hard to tell. The body was mutilated beyond recognition, torn apart with a savagery I'd never seen before. What the hell could do this? Merton whispered, his eyes wide with fear. I shook my head, examining the ground for tracks. Whatever it is, it's not something we've dealt with before. We called it in, and soon the area was swarming with park officials and wildlife experts. They were baffled, theories ranging from road bears to escaped exotic pets. And then it added up. The claw marks, the sheer brutality. It didn't match any known predator in these parts. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the trees, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Something was out there, something that didn't belong in these woods. And I had a sinking feeling that this was just the beginning. Days turned into weeks, and the attacks continued, each one more gruesome than the last. Panic spread through the nearby town of Millbrook. Tourists canceled their trips, and the once bustling park grew eerily quiet. We armed ourselves with rifles and even set up traps, but the creature remained elusive. I spent my days patrolling the park, my nights poring over reports and maps, trying to make sense of the chaos that had descended upon our quiet corner of the world. The weight of responsibility pressed down on me like a physical force. It was my job to protect this land and the people who visited it, but how could I fight an enemy I couldn't even identify? One evening, as I sat at my desk in the ranger station, surrounded by stacks of incident reports and wildlife guides, Martin burst in, his face flushed with excitement. "Jeb, you gotta see this," he said, thrusting a grainy photograph under my nose. I squinted at the image, trying to make sense of the blurry shapes. It looked like it had been taken at night. The flash illuminated a patch of dense underbrush. And there, half hidden behind a tree, was a pair of eyes reflecting the light. They were unlike any animal eyes I'd ever seen, too large, too intelligent, and full of the malevolence that sent a shiver down my spine. "Where did you get this?" I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. "One of the motion sensor cameras we set up near the last attack site," Marvin replied. "It triggered last night, but this is the only usable shot." I stared at the photo, trying to will it into focus to reveal the creature's secrets. But the more I looked, the more questions I had. What kind of animal could evade our traps so easily? How could it be so destructive yet leave so little evidence behind? As that night I tossed and turned in my small cabin on the edge of the park, unable to shake the image of those eyes from my mind. In my dreams, I was lost in the depths of the forest, pursued by an unseen predator. I could hear its breath, feel its presence, but every time I turned to confront it, there was nothing but shadows. I woke with a start, sweat-soaked and gasping for air. As I stared out the window at the moonlit trees, a howl echoed through the night. A sound that was at once familiar and utterly alien. Whatever was out there, it was getting bolder, and I had a sinking feeling that it was only a matter of time before it turned its attention from animals to humans. The next morning, I called an emergency meeting with the park staff and local law enforcement. A small conference room at the ranger station was the air was thick with tension and the acrid smell of too much coffee. "We can't ignore this any longer," I said, standing at the front of the room. "Whatever's out there, it's not going away on its own. We need to take action before someone gets hurt." Sheriff Lenora Harding, a stern-faced woman with salt and pepper hair, leaned forward in her chair. "What exactly are you proposing, Ingram? We've already increased patrols and set up warning signs." I took a deep breath, knowing my next words would be controversial. "I think we need to organize a hunt. A team of experienced trackers and marksmen moving through the park systematically. We find this thing and we end it." The room erupted into a cacophony of voices, some supportive, others vehemently opposed. Martin caught my eye from across the room, his expression a mix of fear and determination. In the end, it was decided. A hunting party would be assembled, led by myself and Sheriff Harding. We'd comb the park inch by inch if we had to, armed with high-powered rifles and tranquilizer guns. The goal was to capture the creature if possible, but we were authorized to use lethal force if necessary. As the meeting broke up, Dr. Eliza Montgomery, the lead wildlife biologist for the park, pulled me aside. Her eyes were sharp behind her wire-rimmed glasses. Her voice was low and urgent. "Jeb, I hope you know what you're doing," she said. "If this is some kind of new species, think of the scientific value. We can't just rush in guns blazing," I nodded, understanding her concern. "I know, Eliza, but my first priority has to be the safety of the people in and around this park. We'll do our best to take it alive, but I can't make any promises." The hunt began at dawn the next day. We split into teams of 4, each group taking a different section of the park. I led my team deep into the old-growth forest where the trees grew so thick they blotted out the sun. Hours passed with no sign of our quarry. The forest was unnaturally quiet, as if every living thing was holding its breath. We moved carefully, checking every shadow, every hollow log, every dense patch of undergrowth. It was nearing dusk when we heard it, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I signaled for the team to stop, my heart pounding in my chest, and then I saw it. A flash of movement in the corner of my eye, gone almost before I could register it. But in that split second, I caught a glimpse of something that defied explanation, a shape that was both familiar and utterly alien, moving with a speed and grace that no natural creature should possess. "There!" I shouted, pointing towards where I'd seen the movement. But as we rushed forward, rifles at the ready, all we found were broken branches and a few tufts of coarse dark fur caught on the undergrowth. As night fell and we made our way back to base camp, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't the hunters here. We were the prey, being watched and evaluated by something far more intelligent and dangerous than we had imagined. The hunt had begun, but I was no longer certain who was hunting whom. Days of fruitless searching had left us all on edge. The creature remained elusive, always one step ahead, leaving only tantalizing clues of its presence. Torn bark on trees, strange tracks that seemed to appear and disappear at random, and the occasional blood-curdling cry in the night that sent shivers down our spines. It was on the 5th night of the hunt that everything changed. I was on solo patrol near the old logging road, a narrow, overgrown path that hadn't seen use in decades. The full moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. I gripped my rifle tightly, every sense on high alert. The forest was playing tricks on me, or so I thought. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig sent my heart racing. But I was a seasoned ranger, I told myself. I knew these woods better than anyone. There was nothing out here that I couldn't handle. How wrong I was. It happened so fast I barely had time to react. One moment I was scanning the darkness, and the next, something massive and fast crashed through the underbrush, slamming into me with the force of a freight train. I hit the ground hard, my rifle skidding away into the shadows. Pain shot through my body as I tried to get up, but it was on me before I could react. A blur of teeth and claws, eyes filled with another worldly rage. In the pale moonlight, I caught glimpses of my attacker, a creature that seemed to be a nightmarish blend of wolf and bear, but larger than either, with intelligence in its eyes that chilled me to my core. Its hot breath washed over me, reeking of blood and decay. I fought back with everything I had, punching, kicking, anything to get it off me. My hand found a rock, and I smashed it against the creature's head with all my strength. It reared back momentarily stunned, giving me a chance to scramble away. But it recovered quickly, lunging at me again with a snarl that sounded almost human. Its claws raked across my chest, tearing through my jacket and shirt like they were tissue paper. The pain was excruciating, but adrenaline kept me moving. Just as I thought it was the end, that this forest I loved would become my grave, salvation came in the most unexpected form. Headlights cut through the darkness, and the creature recoiled, momentarily blinded by the sudden light. It was Martin in one of the park's old pickup trucks. He must have heard the commotion and come to investigate. The creature, faced with this new threat, let out one final bone-chilling howl before vanishing into the night as quickly as it had appeared. Gordon leapt from the truck, his face a mix of relief and terror. "Chad, are you all right?" he asked. "What the hell was that?" I panted, trying to catch my breath. The adrenaline slowly fading and leaving me shaky and weak. "Oh," I managed to gasp out, but it's not a bear. It's something else, something unnatural. As Martin helped me to my feet, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. There, at the edge of the clearing, stood the creature. It was only for a moment, but in that instant our eyes met. And in its gaze I saw something that would haunt me for years to come. Not just animal hunger or rage, but a cold, calculating intelligence. Fender was gone, melting into the shadows as if it had never been there at all. But I knew the truth. It was out there, watching, waiting. And somehow I knew that this was far from over. The days following my encounter were a blur of debriefings, medical examinations, and sleepless nights. My wounds, while painful, were surprisingly superficial given the ferocity of the attack. But the psychological scars ran much deeper. News of the incident spread quickly, and soon Black River National Park was swarming with outsiders. A team of cryptozoologists arrived, drawn by the rumors of an unknown beast. They set up camp, bringing with them an arsenal of high-tech equipment, motion sensors, night vision cameras, and even drones. The park had become a hunting ground, but not just for the creature, for us too. One of the cryptozoologists, Dr. Eliza Montgomery, took a keen interest in the case. She was a no-nonsense woman with a reputation for solving the unsolvable. I found myself spending more and more time with her, poring over the evidence we'd gathered. "It doesn't make sense," she said one evening, frustration evident in her voice. We were in the makeshift command center that had been set up in the ranger station, surrounded by maps, photos, and plaster casts of the creature's tracks. "The size, the strength, the intelligence you described, it doesn't match any known species." I nodded, absently running my hand over the bandages on my chest. "I know, but I saw it, Eliza, it was real." She believed me, I could tell, but belief wasn't enough. We needed proof. As the days wore on, the creature grew bolder and attacked livestock, tearing through fences and leaving a trail of blood and terror. The town demanded action, and soon the government got involved, sending a task force to eliminate the threat. I arrived in a convoy of black SUVs, manned in tactical gear with high-powered weapons. The meter, a stone-faced man named Agent Reeves, made it clear that they were here to kill the creature, not capture it. "This ends now," he said during a tense meeting with local law enforcement and park officials. "Whatever this thing is, it's a threat to public safety. We're going to hunt it down and eliminate." I tried to argue for caution for the possibility of capturing the creature alive, but my words fell on deaf ears. The hunt was on, and this time there would be no half measures. For days, the task force combed the forest, but the creature was always one step ahead. It seemed as if it could anticipate their every move, leading them on a deadly game of cat and mouse through the dense wilderness. And all the while, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something crucial. The creature's intelligence, its elusiveness, and the way it seemed to toy with its pursuers, all pointed to something beyond a mere animal. But what? What kind of creature could possess such cunning, such seemingly human-like intelligence? The question haunted me, keeping me awake long into the night as I stared out my cabin window at the dark, forbidding forest beyond. Little did I know that the true horror was yet to come. The creature wasn't just surviving our attempts to hunt it down, it was learning, adapting, and soon it would strike in a way that none of us could have anticipated. The attacks continued, growing more vicious and frequent. It seemed as if our efforts to hunt the creature had only served to enrage it further. The fear that had gripped the town of Millbrook now turned to panic. People barricaded themselves in their homes, schools were closed, and a strict curfew was imposed. The once bustling tourist town became a ghost town with empty streets and boarded-up shops. I spent my days in the field, tracking the creature's movements, and my nights poring over reports and theories. Sleep became a luxury I could ill afford, and when I did manage to close my eyes, my dreams were haunted by glowing eyes and razor-sharp claws. It was still one of these rare moments of rest that had occurred. The creature struck in broad daylight at the edge of town. I was jolted awake by the sound of screaming and the wail of sirens. I rushed out, still pulling on my jacket to find chaos in the streets. People were running in panic, and in the distance I could hear the unmistakable roar of the creature. Martin's truck screeched to a halt beside me, his face pale with fear. "It's at the supermarket," he gasped. "You've got to go now." We sped through the deserted streets as the roars grew louder. The scene that greeted us was one of pure horror. Cars were overturned, windows shattered, and there in the middle of the parking lot was the creature. It was even more terrifying in the harsh light of day. A monstrous blend of wolf and bear, it moved with terrifying speed and purpose. Its fur was matted with blood, its eyes gleaming with almost human intelligence. We fired at it, but bullets seemed to have little effect. The creature tore through the streets, leaving a path of destruction in its wake. Desperate, I grabbed a flare gun from my belt and fired, aiming for its eyes. The creature howled in agony, momentarily blinded by the intense light. It retreated into the woods, leaving us shaken but alive. The flare had given us a fighting chance, if only temporarily. As we surveyed the damage, the full weight of what had happened settled over us. This was no longer a problem we could contain. The creature had brought its terror to our doorstep, and things would never be the same. That night, the town held an emergency meeting. The atmosphere in the crowded community center was tense, fear and anger simmering just beneath the surface. People demanded answers, solutions, anything to end the nightmare that had descended upon our town. I stood at the front of the room, feeling the weight of every eye upon me. "I know you're all scared," I began, my voice hoarse from exhaustion. "What happened today was unthinkable, but we're not beaten yet." Dr. Montgomery stepped forward, her face set with determination. "We've been approaching this all wrong," she said. "We've been treating this creature like an animal, but it's clear now that it's far more intelligent than we initially believed." She went on to propose a plan. Using the flare's blinding effect, we could trap the creature, sedate it, and relocate it far away from any human settlements. It was a long shot, but it was all we had. The debate raged for hours. Some wanted to call in the military to bomb the entire forest if necessary. Others argued for more humane methods, still clinging to the hope that the creature could be studied, understood. In the end, it was decided. One would set the trap using a clearing surrounded by tranquilizer guns and infrared sensors. I volunteered to be the bait, knowing the risks, but unable to ask anyone else to take on such a dangerous role. As the meeting broke up, Martin pulled me aside, his eyes filled with concern. "Are you sure about this, Jeb?" "It's suicide." I placed a hand on his shoulder, trying to project a confidence I didn't entirely feel. "Someone has to do it, Martin, and I know these woods better than anyone." As I walked home that night, the weight of responsibility pressing down on me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something crucial. The creature's behavior, its intelligence, the way it seemed to target specific areas, none of it added up to a simple predator, no matter how unusual. But as I stared out at the dark forest beyond the town's limits, I knew one thing for certain. Tomorrow would end this, one way or another. Dawn broke cold and misty over Black River National Park. We had spent the night setting up our trap. A clearing surrounded by hidden tranquilizer guns and infrared sensors. I stood in the center, a flare gun in one hand and a rifle in the other, my heart pounding so hard I was sure the creature would hear it from miles away. Martin and the others were stationed at strategic points around the perimeter, ready to spring the trap. Dr. Montgomery monitored the sensors from a nearby command post, her voice calm in my earpiece as she relayed information. Hours passed, each minute stretching into an eternity. The forest was unnaturally quiet, as if every living thing was holding its breath in anticipation. And then, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the trees, I heard it. The soft thud of heavy paws on the forest floor, the rustle of leaves, and then silence. I gripped the flare gun tighter, my palms slick with sweat. It emerged from the shadows like a nightmare given flesh. In the fading light, I could see it clearly for the first time. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall when it reared up on its hind legs. Its fur was a patchwork of dark colors, matted and scarred in places, but as the eyes that held me transfixed. Intelligent, calculating, and filled with a rage that seemed almost human. It snarled, and I could see the scars from the flares still fresh on its face. It was cautious, wary of the trap. I raised the flare gun, my hand shaking. In that moment, time seemed to slow. I saw the creature tense, preparing to lunge. I saw the flash of intelligence in its eyes, the split-second decision it was making. And in that instant, I understood. This wasn't just an animal, it was something more. I fired the flare, but it was ready. It dodged with inhuman speed, lunging at me with claws extended. The world became a blur of pain and chaos. I felt its claws rake across my chest. I felt myself being lifted off the ground. But then the tranquilizers hit, one after another. The creature's grip loosened, and we both crashed to the ground. It staggered, roared one final time, and collapsed, its body twitching as the sedatives took effect. As the team rushed in, securing the creature with reinforced restraints, I lay there, gasping for breath, staring into its slowly closing eyes. And in that moment, I saw something that would haunt me for years to come. A flicker of recognition, understanding, and relief. The aftermath was a blur. The creature was loaded onto a specially designed transport, ready to be taken to a secure facility for study. As Dr. Montgomery oversaw the operation, she knelt beside me, her face a mix of concern and excitement. "You did it, Jed," she said, helping me to my feet. "We've made the discovery of the century." But as I watched them load the sedated creature into the transport, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Whatever this being was, wherever it had come from, I had a sinking feeling that there were more out there, and that our encounter in Black River National Park was just the beginning. Months have passed since that fateful night in the clearing. Black River National Park has begun to heal, its scars slowly fading. Tourists have started to return, drawn by the legend of the Black River Beast. I've remained as head ranger, but things have changed. There's a watchfulness in the town now, a sense that the wilderness we thought we knew holds secrets we're only beginning to understand. Dr. Montgomery's team continues to study the creature at a secure facility. The reports I've received are fascinating and terrifying in equal measure. DNA analysis has revealed a genetic structure unlike anything seen before. Part animal, part something else. As for me, I still patrol the forests I've come to call home. But now, when night falls and the shadows lengthen, I find myself listening more closely to the sounds of the wilderness, waiting, watching for any sign that we're not alone. Because deep down I know the truth. The creature we captured wasn't a lone predator. It was a scout, an advance guard for something larger. Something that's still out there, waiting. And when it comes, well, need to be ready.